Hey there, everybody. How you doing tonight? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Should be a great program for you tonight. Just a few things that we're going to talk about for my opening remarks. I'll be answering super chat questions in the second half of the show. It's going to be good. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Always great when you hit the notifications bell. And I guess we'll just jump into it. Should be a fun, laid back stream tonight. Should be good, some good stuff. So, yeah.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Yep. Should be great, folks. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. The way this works is I give my opening remarks. After I give my opening remarks, then from there, at that point, we do the roll call where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. And then from there, after that, I answer super chat questions for the rest of the night. So that's how it works. So if you have something about which you would wish to have me opine or give you an answer, if you ask me a question, for the most part, I will give you an answer. Send a super chat. Tonight, I'll be writing them down. I'll be typing them as we go along. And that is how we will do it. Ayatollah Khomeini and the Islamic Revolution. All right. Writing it down. All right. Very good. First question already. Khomeini and the Islamic Revolution. Wrote it down. And that's how it works. So welcome, everybody. So glad to be engaging with all of you here tonight. So I guess a couple things. First of all, real quick, first things first, I just want to mention this because it's not getting much play in American media, but I feel like this could be a very, very serious situation. So I saw that RT, the suppressed TV news network that I work for, that the U.S. government doesn't want you to watch. About 2 hours ago, they tweeted out the following. Islamabad calls up troops as ousted Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan leads protest caravan into the capital. That's big. Now, we know Imran Khan was ousted because he was basically more or less siding with Russia. Against the Ukrainian neo-Nazis and against NATO, and that he was forced out of office. We also know that Pakistan is an essential part of the China-Pakistan economic corridor and the Belt and Road. I mean, okay. Writing it down. And as a part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and bringing economic development, and that he says he was ousted. The USA continues to claim he wasn't ousted by them, but he continues to point to the role of U.S.-backed NGOs and U.S. leaders not approving of his statements, and that situation could get very, very intense. Now we know, at one point in Pakistan they had a socialist president, an openly socialist president who, quoted Marx and Lenin. His name was Bhutto. And Bhutto, he quoted Marx and Lenin, and he studied, it was very close to China, invoked Mao Zedong thought, built a movement of the workers and peasants. His movement, their slogan was Islam is our religion, socialism is our politics, Islamic socialism is our ideology. And the USA not only backed the military of Pakistan in toppling Bhutto, but then on top of that, the United States enabled the military dictatorship that came into power to frame up Bhutto, and give him the death penalty. It was really, really horrendous. And Ramsey Clark, who I used to work for, the former U.S. Attorney General, he intervened and tried to stop the execution of Bhutto. George Galloway, who I have the honor of working with, he also did that as well. Hey, Troy, so glad to have your support, and thank you very much for the super chat. He also intervened, and so the USA has intervened in Pakistani politics before. And this is a particularly brutal case. So a lot of eyes at this point. All right, we'll write that down. At this point, a lot of eyes are on Pakistan and the situation that's developing there. So, the people of Pakistan have poured out into the streets to support Imran Khan. The protest caravan is entering Islamabad. The military has been called up. This could get ugly really, really quickly. The people of Pakistan are with Imran Khan. The anti-imperialist camp is with Imran Khan. He says this is a U.S.-backed coup. He came into office condemning the U.S. drone strike program. His presidency, he hasn't been a full-on anti-imperialist like many had hoped. He's made a lot of compromises, but he's considered to be a populist and an anti-imperialist. So there you go. Marcos in the Philippines, taking the W in. Okay, all right. Marcos in the Philippines. Most say. All right. So yeah, that's one situation that I can guarantee you mainstream media is not paying attention to. We should all be paying attention to. In addition to that, we're all reacting to the horrendous shooting that happened. So now we've had 2 shootings just this week. There was the shooting that happened in Buffalo, and then now there's the shooting that just happened in Texas. And people are reacting to that, U.S. society has this demented problem with people losing their minds and shooting. And in this case, it was a lot like the Sandy Hook thing, where this guy, I guess he killed his grandmother, and then he went to a school and killed a bunch of children. Just absolutely horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And of course, there's a new debate about gun control. But at the same time, this is a sign that U.S. society is deeply, deeply unhealthy. No question about it. This is a kind of dangerous criminality that the world has never seen before, that people crack and become so murderous, pouring their rage out at a bunch of random school children like this. This is particularly horrendous. A lot of people are really horrified. They're also really horrified by that racist murderer in Buffalo, right, who just went to the grocery store and just started killing random black people, releasing a white supremacist manifesto. People are pointing out that he used some of the white supremacist symbols that the Azov battalion uses. Mainstream media somehow thinks that this guy who's using the very symbols that the Azov battalion, the neo-Nazi group the USA supports in Russia, they think somehow this guy is Russia's fault when he's doing exactly, he's wearing the exact symbols of the people the USA is supporting to fight against Russia. That shows you how ridiculously biased our media is, and that they don't ever pause for a moment. They don't ever pause for a moment and say, wait a minute. They're so controlled. But that's what's going on. And that's particularly horrendous. So we want to talk about that. There seems to be a moment where it looks like there's now suddenly hope. I told you guys that something had changed with regards to Ukraine. It looked like suddenly there's been some hope for negotiations. Now, it ain't over till it's over, as they say, and nothing has happened yet. But I told you all that about a week and a half ago, it looked like something was happening. I seem to be right. Now we have the New York Times saying they don't think it's realistic at this point to drive Russia out of the territories that Ukraine claims. The New York Times is calling for negotiations. It looks like the Ukrainian side is making some noise. So this all indicates things could move in a good direction. We could be seeing peace soon. Let's just hope that these things pan out. Very scary times that we're living in. Very, very scary times that we're living in. So I just wanted to kind of give you a news rundown about the situation. The food crisis, right? We know about the baby formula crisis and how serious that is. And the food crisis now is also, we're facing a global food crisis. It's going to be extreme. I warned you about it. Joe Biden has admitted it's going to happen. Russia has been warning about it. So we're bracing for the food crisis that's coming up. I mean, these are important times to be political. These are very, very important times to be political. I keep reminding myself, I take a deep breath a lot these days, and I remind myself that we are living in the last days of American capitalism and imperialism. These are the last days. These are the last days, and these are the end. This is the end, right? And that, you know, so many of the greatest revolutionaries would kill to be in our shoes. Joe Hill is jealous of us. Fred Hampton is jealous of us. Gus Hall, William Z. Foster are jealous of us, because as much as in their time there was a lot of revolutionary organizing, a lot of resistance, they did not live in a period where we could actually see the overthrow of American imperialism, where we could actually see the United States start to move towards socialism. But we are now living in a period where that is possible. It wasn't possible in the 1930s, wasn't possible in the 1960s, but it is possible now. We are entering the beginnings of a revolutionary period in the United States. And these are very much the last days of American imperialism. However, we have to keep in mind the words of Rosa Luxemburg, who said, "Socialism or barbarism." There is no guarantee that out of this will come a higher stage, a higher plane. There's no guarantee of that. The U.S. society could still deteriorate into barbarism, right? Like the Roman Empire. When the Roman Empire fell, it didn't lead to a higher plane, to a higher form of civilization. The Roman Empire deteriorated into something that was worse. As bad as the Roman Empire was, we don't support the Roman Empire, but instead of the Roman Empire moving toward a more progressive society, the Roman Empire deteriorated into barbarism. And Rosa Luxemburg said that imperialism, capitalism in its monopoly stage of imperialism, would ultimately lead to deterioration into barbarism without the conscious intervention of the working class. And that's what we have to do. If we don't effectively intervene in these times, we will see a society that is worse, that is much less stable, that is much less secure than American capitalism is. We're seeing the deterioration of imperialism into barbarism. However, if we intervene with city builder socialism, that could change. All right, why is there still immigration? Okay. So that's important to keep in mind as well. So amid these important times, as I have many times emphasized on these lives, this isn't just entertainment. This isn't just commentary. As class analysis says, city building socialism is the only way out. And the synthetic left is leading people astray. The woke cult that supports the Democrats, that thinks real socialists are Nazis, and wants to exterminate all of us. That basically thinks we should all be murdered because we're not supporting the war against Russia. The right wing that believes in free market libertarianism and promotes anti-immigrant bigotry. Neither of these forces have the answer. The synthetic left and the right wing both don't have the solution. Only real city builder socialism is the solution. Only the politics of Xi Jinping, the politics of the leadership of Vietnam, the politics of the Cuban Revolution, the politics of Nicaragua and Bolivarianism, only the 21st century city builder socialist tendency. Only this movement we're seeing around the world of governments of action that fight for working families against the big monopolies and corporations. That's the only way out of the nightmare, the pending nightmare that we're seeing in U.S. society. That's really the only way we can get out of this. And that among U.S. politics, other than us, right, the Center for Political Innovation and the groups we're aligned with, people like Jimmy Dore, people like Jackson Hinkle, people like Infrared and Haas, people like Working Class Revolt, people like Peter Coffin, other than those folks, right? At this point, we're not seeing city builder politics. And so those of us who actually understand city builder socialism, we have a responsibility. We have to take action. From what sources? All right. Okay. Books on. But we have to take action. I mean, we have no other choice. If we really understand that we need an optimistic, constructive socialism, we need the American people to understand that socialism isn't about destroying America. It's about saving America from the nightmare of capitalism, the nightmare of the unfolding decay of the capitalist system, and moving towards socialism with American characteristics, a socialism crafted to address the crisis and the situation in our country. If we understand that, we're obligated to do something about it. And so, for those of you who may not be aware, if you're a member of the city of the Center for Political Innovation, we need an economy that serves the people, not the very wealthy few. Exactly, David Fox. We are having our national gathering. Our national 4-day gathering is taking place in Kansas. So actually, Lily Goldklang, the retreat coordinator, has put together this message to invite people to the retreat. You have to be a member of the C.P.I. to come, but if you join the C.P.I., you'll be invited. You can join the C.P.I. down below. But Lily Goldklang is she's the retreat coordinator, and she made this video message, and we just finished it. It's going to be posted probably later tonight, or it'll be posted on the social media of the Center for Political Innovation. But we just finished editing and putting together this video message from Lily Goldklang. And so we're gonna put it up here for you to watch. This is the video message invitation to our national gathering in Kansas.
Comrades, I'm sending you this message because we're living in very serious times, and the stakes are getting higher. My name is Lily Goldklang, and I'm reaching out to you as the coordinator of the Center for Political Innovation's 4-day national gathering, set to take place Wednesday through Sunday, June 22nd through 26th, in the U.S. state of Kansas. As Joe Biden pushes harder and harder to expand the NATO confrontation with Russia and Ukraine, the ultra-rich and their sinister agenda of building a low-wage police state at home are marching ahead. Those of us who understand the objective laws of history know that the problem is rooted in the breakdown of the capitalist system on a global scale. We also understand the role of conscious revolutionaries and anti-imperialists here in the United States is essential. While the synthetic left has given its middle finger to the working families struggling to pay their bills amidst inflation, the only real opposition comes from the right wing, which espouses free market insanity and delusional conspiracy narratives. Where is Joe Hill? Where is Fred Hampton? Where is Elizabeth Gurley Flynn? Where is William Z. Foster? The tradition of scientific socialism and class struggle populism is needed more than ever, as political discourse in America deteriorates along with living standards. Only a government of action that fights for working families can save America from the ongoing crisis. Kansas is a beautiful state in America's rural heart. It's where John Brown fought back against pro-slavery militias and stood his ground for the inalienable right of all people to be free. It's also the home state of Superman, the Man of Steel, the fictional character who incarnates the anti-racist, anti-fascist, and progressive ideals of the Roosevelt years. And it was probably at least somewhat inspired by the real Man of Steel, Joseph Stalin. If you join us this June, you'll meet a number of like-minded people who are committed to the project of 21st century socialism. You will get to engage directly with Caleb Maupin, the ideological founder of the city-building tendency, and a consistent voice of reason amidst a sea of insanity. In addition, you will also get to meet and hear musical performances by David Rovix, the progressive songwriter. You'll learn some real skills of organizing and building real communities of solidarity, and participate in discussions wrangling with the big questions of our time. We want you to spend 4 days learning, engaging, relaxing, and building community with other revolutionary cadre during these hard times. Our aim is for you to return back home with more skills, more connections, and more revolutionary enthusiasm than ever before, as we prepare for another year of intense tests and challenges for our growing movement. While we will ask a small donation from each attendee to cover the costs of housing and food, we realize that these are hard times, and want to give special priority to working class youth who may not have the resources, but are willing to give themselves to this movement. If you are unable to attend, we ask that you please donate to make it possible for someone else to get the revolutionary training needed for the tasks ahead. Now is the time to make commitments to anti-imperialism. Real organizations of resistance and communities of solidarity must be constructed. Come support our organization and participate in this 4-day gathering. As the founder of the Center for Political Innovation, Caleb Maupin said recently, "If you want to build a ship that can withstand a heavy storm, you don't wait until the storm has arrived in order to build it. Time is running out. Your decisions could be vital. Dare to struggle, dare to win." To RSVP to the retreat, please send a direct email to me, goldklanglily@gmail.com. goldklanglily@gmail.com. See you there.
All right. That was a great message from Lily. So if you want to come to the retreat, all you have to do is join the Center for Political Innovation, and then you'll be invited. And from there, we will send you the invitation. All right. So I just wanted to get that message out there. Writing down the super chats. Got one more that I saw up here. The government of action. Wrestle control away from Wall Street. So it's going to be a great 4 days. So I hope that you will join us. A number of people have signed up already. So if you're a member of the Center for Political Innovation and you want to come, by all means, just RSVP. Send Lily your RSVP email that you want to come. And if you are not yet a member of the Center for Political Innovation, all you have to do is sign up below. We have the goal of 1,000 members by May 1st, 2023. 1K by May. Now, at this point, we have almost 200 members, but we are going to start rapidly expanding. We're going to have a big event August 6th in Chicago. So, yeah, that's kind of our goal. We're expanding. I am going to be in Seattle and in Portland this weekend. I'll actually be in the Pacific Northwest this weekend. I'm taking a flight Friday evening. I'm flying out to the Pacific Northwest. So if you're an activist there and you're involved, by all means, contact the local organizers. We're not having any public events, but we're going to have a couple, local meetups for people that are part of this community. So by all means, folks that are in the Pacific Northwest, I can't wait to see you. It's going to be awesome. Was Napoleon a positive figure? So that'll be good. It'll be good to see you. Yeah, that should be good. So I guess I'm glad I could give you that message. We're going to post it later, but it should be a great 4-day gathering in Kansas. It's going to be awesome. So I just wanted to show you that video. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about here in my opening remarks, the other thing I wanted to just quickly talk about is we have now finally published Fidel Castro Exposes the Synthetic Left. And I want to say that Robert Lawrence, who's the editor of this, he put this book together. I had the idea of publishing it. It was really Robert who did the hard work. He got the cover laid out. He got the interior, the pages laid out. I wrote the introduction, but Robert Lawrence made this book happen. He was in touch with the Cuban embassy and others to make sure we had the proper permissions. He then stayed on top of getting it published. He did a really good job with this book. This book it turned out really nice. I got my first shipment of books today. And I opened them up and I thought, this is a win. This is good. This is really good stuff. I'm really happy with how this book turned out. Yeah, I mean, if you want to get a copy, you can do that. I'm actually going to read to you the introduction to Fidel Castro Exposes the Synthetic Left. I'm just going to read you the introduction to the book because this is not a short book, mind you. This is almost 300 pages of the writings of Fidel Castro, the columns that he wrote where he talked about the CIA and drugs. He talked about Obama. He talked about, the brainwashing from mainstream media. And yeah, I mean, it's really tremendous. And Amazon banned this book, basically. They would refuse to publish it. They kept insisting we didn't have the copyrights when we do. We showed them backwards and forwards that this was a public domain book. They still wouldn't publish it. So if you buy it, you ain't buying it from Amazon. The online book distributor is linked below. You won't be buying it from Amazon because they banned it. But this is our book, Fidel Castro's Writings on the Synthetic Left. And so I'm just going to read you. I am going to read you the introduction to the book that I wrote. So there you go. This is my introduction that I wrote to Fidel Castro Exposes the Synthetic Left. Fidel Castro is loved by the progressive people of the world. He led the national liberation struggle and socialist revolution on the island of Cuba. In doing so, he brought literacy, employment, and healthcare to millions of people. The Cuban educational system has been praised by renowned educational scholars like Jonathan Kozol, and Ban Ki-moon described Cuba's medical school as the greatest in the world. But the achievements of the Cuban Revolution, which Fidel Castro led, go far beyond the island 90 miles south of Florida. Cuba has always stood with oppressed people fighting for their freedom. Cuba sent soldiers to defend Angola from an invasion. Cuba was praised excessively by Nelson Mandela for its relentless support for the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. Cuba's literacy volunteers and medical aid have touched the lives of people on almost every continent. Despite a criminal blockade and unending efforts to topple the Communist Party, the Cuban Revolution has a list of accomplishments that continue to grow. Fidel Castro, along with his brother Raul Castro and Che Guevara, was the symbol of a dramatic transformation that improved millions of lives. While many left-wing and progressive-minded people in the United States, from Danny Glover to Michael Moore, have praised Cuba's achievements, among leftist circles in the United States, there is a lack of willingness to listen to what Fidel Castro actually said. Despite a lot of projection from U.S. leftists, Fidel Castro was not a counterculture 1960s hippie or a woke hipster. The ideology Castro stood for was not intersectionality or postmodernism, but rather Marxism-Leninism. Fidel Castro stood in solidarity with North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, and every anti-imperialist country that challenged U.S. imperialism. Castro maintained that both China and Vietnam were indeed socialist societies and encouraged the Cuban communists to study their market reforms in order to modernize Cuba. In 2014, Fidel Castro wrote, "Xi Jinping is one of the strongest and most capable revolutionary leaders I have met in my life." Fidel Castro opposed drug use, and Cuba has some of the strictest anti-drug policies of any country in the world. Tourists and other visitors to the island are always warned about the harsh consequences of being caught with drugs, even marijuana. Cuban children wear uniforms, march in formation, and pledge each morning that they will live like Che Guevara. Fidel Castro was a leftist, but his ideology was not liberal deconstructionism of American academics. Fidel Castro was illiberal and anti-imperialist, and instead of deconstructing Cubans with a narrative of identity politics, he unified them as a solid bloc against the Wall Street monopolists and their military threats. This book has been assembled by the Center for Political Innovation, edited by Robert Lawrence, to give voice to what Fidel Castro actually believed and contrast it with the woke or synthetic leftism being promoted in U.S. society. This book is published in the hopes that U.S. leftists will abandon their pro-imperialist destructive tendencies, as well as their witch hunting of so-called red browns and Nazbols, and instead work to develop a progressive, optimistic, constructive socialism. Millions of young Americans are angry at U.S. capitalism and imperialism and open to learning about socialism. They need to understand what socialism means and that there is no one more qualified to teach it to them than someone who built a strong socialist country just 90 miles south of the United States. That is the introduction. Not a long introduction, mind you. That is the introduction. Now, because this book has just been published, I actually sat down and read it all this afternoon. This afternoon, I had some free time on my hands, so I read the book this afternoon. And I got to say, Robert Lawrence did a great job of picking essays. I guess I'll summarize for you. The first two essays that Fidel Castro that are in here, the World Government Part 1, the World Government Part 2, Fidel Castro quotes this writer, Daniel Estulin. And Daniel Estulin writes about how U.S. mainstream media brainwashes people, and how since the 1920s and 30s, but especially after the Second World War, U.S. mainstream media, rock music, MTV, has been cultivated to brainwash, to kind of get Americans into a hypnotic state so they don't seriously think about politics, and how that accompanied MK Ultra. And he talks about how Western media is brainwashing. MTV is brainwashing. The Beatles were cultivated to kind of get people into a trance, and and how basically, there's a reason that they have TV screens everywhere in the United States, just pumping propaganda at you 24/7. It's to keep you from thinking. And he's talking especially about the minds of young people and how important it is to keep that out of Cuba. I mean, that stuff was really great. He has a section about imperialism and drugs, and he talks about how in Bolivia, they're fighting for the right of the people to drink coca tea because that's not cocaine, and how the imperialists are being hypocritical and attacking Bolivia over the coca tea because they're the main, drug dealers around the world. They're tied up with the narco gangs, etc. He gives us he remarks about the Ninth Congress of the Young Communist League of Cuba and the future of young people and what socialism means for young people. He talks about North Korea and how Obama was threatening war against North Korea. A great essay about that and about how Obama is like pushing us basically to World War III at the time, and how North Korea has been brutally attacked, and how the U.S. imperialists threatened atomic bombs against them. He talks about the Soviet Union and the victory over fascism. He talks about the Federal Reserve System and where it came from, and how the U.S. economy is basically rigged by the big banks. He talks about the killing machine, is what he calls the military industrial complex, the killing machine. And he goes into detail about how basically, the U.S. economy is based on war and destruction. He talks about how George W. Bush, is somebody who is psychological. He does like a psychoanalysis of George W. Bush. It's fascinating. He says Bush expects everything will be solved with a bang. And he talks about how Bush, if you read his facial expressions, he's not actually very smart. He doesn't really know what's going on. He just has a set of phrases that are memorized, and he doesn't quite know how to react with people. He has kind of a psychoanalysis of President Bush that I thought was fascinating. He talks about Obama getting the Nobel Prize. He talks about Hugo Chavez and what made Hugo Chavez a political genius, and how, like, he talks about Hugo Chavez giving this 9-hour speech, on how to improve the country. And it's interrupted by this right-wing woman who just interrupts Hugo Chavez in the middle of his speech. And Hugo Chavez just lets her talk, and he lets her just give all these personal attacks on him, interrupting his big 9-hour speech. And then afterwards, he just makes some kind of joke and then just keeps speaking for another 9 hours or something. And it's like amazing about how Hugo Chavez was like a totally disciplined person who had amazing self-control. He talks about Nicaragua. There's an essay, The Overwhelming Victory of Daniel and the FSLN, talking about Nicaragua. And the last section, I mean, this is amazing. I mean, we didn't even plan this. I mean, it's like, we put this together a couple months ago, and then we battled with Amazon. But the last section is about food sovereignty and the food crisis, and how he's basically predicting that because of U.S. imperialism, there's going to be food shortages all over the world. This is really important stuff. And what I really think is really good about this book, is I was reading the essays, is that Fidel is speaking to young people, and he was writing these essays before he died, right? This was after he retired. When he stepped down, when he was no longer playing a political role, he had a column in the daily newspaper in Cuba, in the Granma daily newspaper. He had these columns, the reflections. And it's like he's saying, like, before I go, I want to make some things clear. And he's especially speaking to the younger kids, a lot addressed to the youth of Cuba. And he tells them, beware of American media. It's brainwashing. It's hypnosis. It's trying to make you stupider. It's trying to prevent your ability to think. He says, stay away from drugs, because drugs, they seem all revolutionary, but they're actually a tool of the imperialists. He's saying that Barack Obama is a fraud and a con man. He's urging people to be like, to look up to Hugo Chavez and try to be a disciplined, self-controlled person like Hugo Chavez. I mean, it's really something special. Robert did a great job picking out these essays and putting this book together. And so this is the latest Center for Political Innovation book. Fidel Castro Exposes the Synthetic Left. And anyone who reads this, the second that you hear one of these people on Twitter who's decided that they're going to join the pro-imperialist campaign against me, the second you hear one of them, talk shit about me, everything they say about me is way more true about Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro, if you think I'm an asshole, read about Fidel Castro. Read about Fidel Castro, because, Fidel Castro, that socialism, as I have discovered in my life experience, socialism around the world is not like the synthetic left. Fidel Castro and real communism is not the synthetic left. It's anti-imperialism. It's disciplined. It's people being proud of who they are, loving their country, loving their community, and hating the monopolistic imperialists that are trying to destroy human life. It's amazing stuff, right? And Fidel Castro, he talks about climate change. He talks about the food crisis. He talks about so many issues. So this is our latest book, Fidel Castro Exposes the Synthetic Left. You can order it. The link is down below. You can't get it on Amazon because Amazon told us they wouldn't run it. They insisted it was copyrighted, even though we showed them that it wasn't. So if you want to get your hands on it, you got to order it. We got it, another book distributor. I am really glad we put this out. Great work, Robert. I'm really happy with your work here. This is good stuff. So glad that we did this. So that's kind of what I had in mind for my opening remarks tonight. Great video from Lily inviting you to the retreat. Just wanted to show you the new book available. Fidel Castro Exposes the Synthetic Left. And I guess, folks, on that note, why don't we do the roll call, and then I'll just start answering your super chat questions for the rest of the night. I think that's how we're going to do it. Writing down your super chat questions. So names and locations, folks, names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations, call you out as I see you. And then from there, we will, at that point, we'll do the super chats. So who's with us tonight? Who is with us tonight? All right. Jamie in St. Paul is the first name I see. Temple City, California after that. Io Hillary in New York City is with us. Parasocialite, Tristan in Maryland. Micah in Las Vegas. Bergen County. Antonio in Brazil. Bendigo. David Fox. Bismuth in Wisconsin. Great YouTube channel. Check out Bismuth. He's doing great stuff. Dario from Brooklyn. Colin from Massachusetts. Shout out to you, Colin. Right. We got Baltimore. Matt. We got Don D in NYC. Shout out to you, Don D. Good stuff. Good work. George in Sydney. We got Beirut, Lebanon. We got Ron from St. Louis. Danny from Illinois. Gavin in Illinois. Greenland. St. David's, Bermuda. Houston, Texas. Adam in Salt Lake City. Houston, Texas. Bob Troy in New York. Mark Sherrill in New York. Novato, California. Mark Sherrill in New York. Steve in Brisbane, Australia. OYMX does great videos, by the way. He just did this great video using my talk from the conference. Go subscribe right now to OYMX channel. Great stuff. From New Zealand. Leo and Mimi from Mexico. CP in Chicago. You're the Communist Party of Chicago, huh? All right. We got Tampa, Florida, USA. Herb Bryant. We got Marissa in Washington. Shout out to you. And thank you, Herb Bryant, for the super chat. Calgary, Canada. Miami, Florida. We got Yahoo in Taiwan. We got Steve in Georgia, Montezuma, North Pole, Scat. We got Pittsburgh. We got Ash, C.P.I. Chicago land. Very good. Mohsin from Iran. Very, very good. Very, very, very good. Very, very, very good. Very, very, very good stuff. So glad to have you all here with us tonight, folks. Good stuff. So glad to have you all here. We're having a great time. Great stuff. John Whitty in Houston is with us. Very good. Yada Yisrael in Chicago is with us. Very, very good. Kieran from San Diego is with us. Very, very good. Glad to have you here, Kieran from San Diego. All right. Should we start answering super chat questions? All right. Keep them rolling in, folks. At this point, we're starting to answer super chat questions. So if you have a question, I will answer it, and that's how we'll do it. Khomeini and the Islamic Revolution. Well, Grand Ayatollah Ali said Khamenei is the current leader of Iran. He was not the first one. It was Khomeini. It was Ruhollah Khomeini was the leader of the Islamic Revolution. And he was a Shia Muslim cleric in Iran who was critical of the Shah of Iran. He was more conservative than the Shah of Iran. When the Shah of Iran started implementing modern reforms, he went into exile in the 1960s because he was known to be a critic of the Shah. He was a very, very religious, conservative, Ayatollah, Shia Muslim cleric. He went into exile in Britain and in France. He was in exile, and they smuggled tapes of him cassette tapes into Iran. And a lot of people in the military and a lot of people in Iran in general would listen to these illegal smuggled cassette tapes of Ayatollah Khomeini. And Khomeini, he had this, religious fanatical devotion. If you read his writings during the 1970s, the world was really changing during the 1970s. And Khomeini had been this fanatical religious figure who was very conservative, much more conservative than the Shah, didn't approve of a lot of the Shah's modernist reforms. But because the world was changing so much in like the late 60s and the early 70s, Khomeini's writings started to change also. And if you read Khomeini's writings, his writings in the 1970s are very anti-imperialist. When I was in Iran, they gave me books about, what is Shia Islam, the history of the Islamic Revolution. And, these books sound like Marxist texts almost. It begins with like, history is made by great revolutionaries and is driven forward by great revolutionaries. And, Shia Islam has some very, very revolutionary content in it because, at the time, following the death of the Prophet Muhammad, there was division in the what they call the Caliphate or the Islamic Empire, and there was really a fight between the aristocracy and the feudal kind of rulers of the Islamic Empire and the merchants, the mercantile classes. And the mercantile classes basically went after and persecuted the descendants and relatives of Muhammad. Because they didn't want them to hold on and to maintain power. And so, there was the imams that the Shia talk about. The imams, they rallied the people against the merchants, against the wealthy merchants who were oppressing people and had great wealth in their hands. I believe Imam Ali, he said that never has he seen great wealth piled up anywhere without great violations of rights all around it. And they said that to stand with the oppressed is one of the most important things in the world. To be a martyr for the cause of justice is one of the most important things in the world. I believe Imam Hussein, he said, this world is a stinking corpse, and anyone who lives in this world will die with it, meaning that you should be doing what's right and be striving to go to heaven when you die, not be striving to do what's right. And that the imams of the caliphate, they became kind of the champions of the peasants and the poor people against the merchants, the merchant class. And, you read about the martyrdom of Imam Ali. You read about the martyrdom of Imam Hussein. These people were murdered. They were killed. And, the battle of Karbala that took place, Karbala is in Iraq. And it's the site where there was a battle in which, the imams and the family, the descendants of Muhammad were slaughtered. And the Shia Islamic tradition really emphasizes martyrdom and sacrifice, standing against oppression, standing for justice, etc. And in the 1970s, Khomeini very much became a big supporter of the Black freedom struggle in the United States. Talked about Malcolm X being a great revolutionary hero. Khomeini also talked about the Irish people and their struggle against imperialism and the struggle of the Black people against apartheid in South Africa, and that Khomeini very much became this kind of revolutionary anti-imperialist, that he was somebody who was always against the West, and he was always very, very strictly religious and Islamic. But because of what was happening in the world, Khomeini, very much became, his religious teachings became aligned with that. Now, he didn't believe in communism. He made clear, because communism was secular. And he talked about how they needed to oppose the economic and military imperialism of the West, but they also needed to oppose the social imperialism of the East. Kind of like Mao, he's talking about Soviet social imperialism. But he argued that the communists export their atheist ideology, and that is not good. And the Western capitalists, they export, economic domination and their military aggression. So that's not good. So his slogan is, he said, neither East nor West, meaning that we're not for the Soviet Union or the United States. And he said, not capitalism, but Islam. That was what he said. We're for not capitalism, but Islam, meaning that they're not Marxists or socialists, but they're also not, in favor of capitalism, not capitalism, but Islam, neither East nor West. And then he said, war of poverty against wealth, meaning that the poor people of the world should rise up against those who have the wealth. And that was the Islamic Revolution, right? Those were kind of the slogans that Khomeini popularized. And, in Iran, you had protesters being killed. And so you had the Shah, who was this brutal US-backed dictator who had like this secret police force called Savak that would torture people and did horrendous things. And so, 1979, there was a political crisis in Iran, and a number of protesters were shot down in the street, and the people were really angry at the Shah of Iran for the fact that he had gunned down peaceful protesters. And so because of that, they had he declared a national holiday, like a day of mourning for the country to calm down. And then in response to that, instead of calming down, the whole country went out and protested, basically. It was kind of a dumb move on the part of the Shah. He thought, well, people like me, I'm going to understand, and I'll declare a national holiday. But then people used that national holiday to go out into the streets and protest, and there were uprisings and protests all over Iran. And amid all that turmoil, Khomeini, who was in exile, he got on a plane and he came back to Iran. And at the airport, thousands of people greeted him. And within the military, there were many military leaders in the army who were admirers of Khomeini. And there were many, many people in the country and the police and local governments. And, they basically, he came back to the country in the middle of this revolutionary upsurge. And Khomeini came back to Iran, and he basically led the Islamic Revolution. The government of Iran was toppled. The Shah, the Pahlavi monarchy was toppled, and the Islamic Republic with a new constitution was declared. And Khomeini was the leader of the Islamic Republic, right? The Islamic Revolutionary Party was the new party that was created, and you had the Islamic Republic of Iran being created. And that's 1979. Then what happened? Well, at that point, the United States, the U.S. Embassy in Iran, all right, Italy and Germany, social democracy led to fascism. Right. Okay, we'll write that down. All right. All righty. Wrote it down. And the other thing to remember, so Khomeini came to power. You had the Islamic Revolution. But there were a lot of different factions in Iran at the time. So the Islamic Revolutionary Party, they were the current that became the new ruling party. But then after that, there was the Tudeh Party, which was the People's Party, which was the Communist Party. It was like the Marxist-Leninist Party of Iran. There were the Fedayeen, which were like Maoists. They were waging like guerrilla warfare, trying to organize the peasantry in the countryside of Iran. And then you had the Mujahideen Khalq, the People's Holy Warriors, they were called. And they were a strange Islamo-Marxist religious cult. And there were different views. China's opinion on Trotskyism. There were different views. Within the Islamic Revolutionary camp, there were some clerics were more sympathetic to communism. And then there were some clerics that said communism is absolutely an apostasy. There you go, right? Communism is absolutely an apostasy. We must have no tolerance for it. And then there were some clerics that said, well, communism is good. It just needs God. Without God, you can't have communism. There was like a spectrum of opinion in Iran about communism. And the communist groups certainly existed, and they were illegal under the Shah, but under the Islamic Revolution, at first, the communist groups were very visible. And so in Tehran and Mashhad and the capital cities, you would see people marching with red flags. You'd see communist groups very openly organizing. But then Iraq invaded Iran. Iraq invaded Iran, and Iraq was a Soviet-aligned country. It was Ba'athist Arab socialism. It had most of its guns, most of its weapons came from the Soviet Union. So at that point, there was a feeling that if you were a communist, you were supporting Iraq. So there started to be a crackdown on communist groups because they said basically we're fighting a war against the Iraqi invaders, and Iraq is a secular, Baath socialist Marxist Soviet aligned government. So they started to crack down, and then Khomeini fired. There was a cleric who was known for making pro-Soviet statements, pro-Marxist statements, and Khomeini fired him. He dismissed him because he said, we can't be having that because Iraq has invaded us. Iraq is our enemy. So after this cleric was fired, the Mujahideen Khalq, which was the Islamo-Marxist cult, basically, they were the three major communist groups: the Tudeh Party, the Fedayeen, and then the People's Mujahideen. They were called the MEK. The MEK, which were the People's Mujahideen, or the Mujahideen Khalq, MEK, right? In response to this pro-Soviet cleric getting fired, they went on a bombing campaign. And they blew up the parliament, and they killed 81 members of the parliament. Can you imagine that? That would be like in the United States, the U.S. Congress, being attacked, and like 81 members of the Congress being killed. Can you imagine that? I mean, that's like a 9/11. Okay. It's like a huge terrorist attack, right? Like that happened, right? 81 parliament members killed, right? They would go to the press conferences of leaders and blow them up. And in fact, the supreme leader, Khamenei, the current supreme leader of Iran, he can't move one of his arms because he was giving a press conference at one point, and a Mujahideen Khalq person showed up with a bomb disguised as a tape recorder, and it blew up, and so he can't move one of his arms. And I mean, they just assassinated people and they murdered people. And it was just this campaign of terrorism. So in response to that, they outlawed the communist parties because this communist group, Mujahideen Khalq, was on a killing spree, and they were being invaded by Iraq. And so in the aftermath of the Islamic Revolution, and in response to the terrorism that they endured, where members of parliament were being bombed and killed, and shootings and assassinations, and this foreign invasion by a Soviet-aligned country, at that point, Iran outlawed communist groups. But a lot of the communist groups, they adjusted. And this is one thing that many people point out. There were a lot of communist groups that said, okay, we can't be communist anymore. And we do support Khomeini because he's anti-imperialist. He's fighting the imperialists. He's not a socialist. We're socialist, but he's anti-imperialist. So a lot of communist groups just changed their name and adopted to be something that was more in line with religious teachings. They'd be like the Islamic Revolutionary Student Association or something like that. And that's actually true. And that a lot of the people in Iran that are supporters, even up to today, that are supporters of the Republic, are influenced by Marxism. In Iranian universities, they study Marx, and they study Lenin's books on imperialism to understand how Iran has been oppressed and why the USA is the main danger. And even up to today, Iran is friendly with Russia and China. It's friendly with Cuba and Venezuela and the Bolivarian countries. Iran very much sees itself as a revolutionary anti-imperialist country. They say that they are neither socialist or capitalist. They just have the Islamic system, which rejects both capitalism and Marxism. But they are very much in the global socialist camp. That's really important. So then the other thing to remember is that right after Khomeini took power, he realized that in order to keep the revolution going, he would have to mobilize the public. So he formed these things called Basij councils. And in every neighborhood, they have this in Iran. They're called the Basij. And Basij means mobilized oppressed, is what it means. The mobilized oppressed, mobilizations of the oppressed. And every neighborhood has one. And it's basically a Soviet. It's like a workers' council. It's a community assembly where men and women get together. The women sit on one side, the men sit on the other side, because it's Islamic and traditional. And they get together and they debate policy in the neighborhood, and they set the agenda, and they listen to the supreme leader's speeches, and they say, how can we carry out the supreme leader's wishes in the neighborhood? How can we enforce it? They have volunteers who kind of walk through the streets to look for any suspicious behavior. When I was in Iran, it was kind of neat. I was there making a documentary with the film crew, and we would frequently get confronted by the Basij because they don't know who I'm, just some white guy walking around talking English, and I've got a film crew with me. And, frequently somebody, it would just look like a normal person. You would never know. And they would walk up to us and be like, hey, who are you? And they'd pull out their badge. And they weren't police. They were Basij volunteers, right? Who they took on the job of basically patrolling the neighborhood. In order to make sure that it was safe and all. I thought it was really neat, right? So, and of course, I mean, we showed them that we had permission to make this film. We didn't have a problem, but I mean, that's how involved the government is. Instead of having cops patrol the streets, they have the Basij, like the people basically control the streets. And the Basij is like a community assembly, like a workers' council. When Iraq invaded, Khomeini declared a construction jihad, he called it. And it was basically like a 5-year plan. It was like what Stalin did with the 5-year plans, where the people went out and built new hospitals and built new power plants. And it was they went out and organized, right? And that Khomeini was definitely a populist, and he was definitely against capitalism, and he was definitely with Che Guevara and Cuba, and definitely with South Africa against apartheid. And I mean, Iran is a revolutionary anti-imperialist country. Not to say that there isn't a bourgeoisie in Iran, right? There is like a national bourgeoisie of private capitalists, but those folks hate the government and they hate the revolution. Like, you have to be there, you have to see it. It's like, yes, Iran does have a big market sector, and there are a lot of wealthy Iranians in northern Tehran. And those folks are there, but they hate Khomeini, and they hate Khamenei, and they hate the revolution, and they're racist as fuck. Those folks, are really racist, and they think, we're Persians. They would say to me, we're white people like you, we're white people like you, Caleb, and now our country's been overrun by Arabs and Turkmen. And, I mean, the people, the counter-revolutionaries, the people in northern Tehran who want to be like the United States, the people, that's a weird question. I wouldn't even put it that way, but the people, I'll write it down, but the people in northern Tehran who are like the United States, who have like restaurants that look like McDonald's, who wear blue jeans all the time. Those people, yeah, they exist. The Iran definitely has a bourgeoisie, but they live in terror of the revolution. I mean, those folks, I mean, the Iranian government is against those folks, and those folks know it. And those folks are terrified of the Islamic Revolution, and they hate it. So it's not as simple as you might think, right? And I've had a lot of people say, well, Iran is a bourgeois nationalist country. And it's like, no, if it was a bourgeois nationalist country, those folks would like it. Like, those folks are terrified of it, right? And if you talk to them, they all think Iran's socialist. They say Iran is really a communist country. They all think Iran's a communist and socialist country. And, I mean, Iran says that they are neither socialist nor capitalist. So it's not as simple as you might think. I'm trying to, think of other things. I mean, the hostage crisis that happened, right? So the CIA, was intervening in Iran, and the U.S. embassy, basically the Islamic Revolution, they alleged the United States was trying to break apart Iran, that they were supporting Arab separatists and they were supporting Kurdish separatists. And the USA denied it. Well, the Islamic Revolutionary students, they seized control of the U.S. embassy, and they took the people inside as hostages. And they let all the black people go, and they let all the women go, except for the ones that were card-carrying CIA agents. And they held the hostages. This was the Iran hostage crisis. And they found documents, all kinds of documents that they found that proved the United States was funding Arab separatists to break apart Iran. It was funding Kurdish separatists to break apart Iran. It's kind of fascinating to read about. In a lot of ways, the Islamic Revolution, I mean, there's a lot going on there. And the hostage crisis happened. Ronald Reagan basically used the hostage crisis to attack Jimmy Carter. To say Jimmy Carter is a soft president, he's weak, and he's let our people be taken. But actually, Reagan was communicating with the Iranians and asked the Iranians to keep the Americans hostage until he took office. So, I mean, the idea that Ronald Reagan is some patriot who loves the United States is bullshit. I mean, he was basically trying to keep Americans being held hostage to help his politics. That reveals that Ronald Reagan is basically a traitor to the country, to the United States. He didn't care about those hostages. He didn't care about the United States. That's an important point no one ever talks about, that Ronald Reagan, it's been proven, was actually talking to the Iranians and saying, please keep these Americans captive, so it'll help my political campaign. And also part of the reason that Iran, and this is kind of fascinating to me, part of the reason that Iran didn't release the hostages until Jimmy Carter left office, it was the day that Ronald Reagan took the oath of office that the hostages were released. Part of the reason for that was because of the fact that Ronald Reagan, was anti-Soviet, and Jimmy Carter, the Soviet Union felt like Jimmy Carter was a guy who would negotiate with them more. And Iran wanted to make clear to the world they were not a Soviet-aligned country. And so because of that, Iran made a point of taking a move that helped Ronald Reagan because they didn't want people to think they were a Soviet-aligned country. I think it's kind of fascinating. Why is this making you cry, Jenny? I'm curious. But anyway, Reza Pahlavi, son of the Shah, seems to have a lot of U.S. federal support. Do you think he's trying to stir things up? All right, we'll talk about that. That happened. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, I could go on. I've been to Iran a number of times. I've seen it up close. So I could tell you a lot of different things about Iran, because Iran is a revolutionary country. And in so many ways it's anti-imperialist, and it's been attacked. It's been subject to brutal sanctions. And it stands with Palestine, and it stands with people all over the world that are fighting for justice. Iranian politics have shifted. They haven't been the same since the revolution, right? In the late 80s, Iran took a strategic turn to the right wing, and a lot of communist prisoners were executed. There was in 1988, 1989, there were mass executions of communist prisoners. And that was seen as kind of, because Saddam Hussein was becoming more and more of an enemy. Originally, Saddam Hussein, at one point at the beginning of the Iraq-Iran war, Saddam Hussein had been aligned with the United States. But as the Iraq-Iran war started going on, the United States actually, started shifting to supporting Iran. And at that point, when the Iraq-Iran war was coming to an end, and the USA was kind of switching to supporting Iran against Iraq, at that point, Iran executed a lot of communist political prisoners to make a point. That's a pretty ugly episode in the late 80s, the mass executions in Iran, 88, 89. And in the early 90s, it seemed like Iran was starting to drift into the Western camp, right? The Soviet Union had fallen. It seemed like the world was shifting, and Iraq was very much seen as like the main anti-imperialist country in the Middle East. Like the Middle East, Iraq, Saddam Hussein was, fighting Israel. And so because of that, then the, the Iranians started shifting into the U.S. camp, but then something happened, which is the axis of evil speech. And after 9/11, George W. Bush gave a speech where he said that there's an axis of evil, and he named three countries that had nothing to do with each other: Iran, a Shia Muslim country; Iraq, Ba'athist Arab socialism, two countries that hate each other. Over 1 million people died in the war between Iraq and Iran. And then North Korea. And so because of those three things, because Iran was named as the axis of evil, that made Iran say, wow, if the United States really, is going to let us, quote unquote, reform and open up or whatever, why are they doing that? Plus the oil prices. When Bush invaded Iraq, the oil prices shot up. And the oil prices were the main way that the Iranian government gets its money. Right, the government of Iran sells oil on the international markets. The private sector, it's not oil, but the oil in Iran is through the government. And so, because the oil prices went through the roof, then the hardliners, the people that are more revolutionary in Iran, that are tied to the government, they had more money. The USA called them the axis of evil, and Ahmadinejad then took office. And Ahmadinejad was a super revolutionary president. Favorite Iranian food, okay. Was a super revolutionary president in so many ways. He really played up, the support for Cuba, for Venezuela. He condemned capitalism in his speeches, super anti-Israel. Ahmadinejad said, look, we've signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but one thing we have the right to do is to have nuclear power. And so they started developing nuclear power, which they're allowed to do. And every site in Iran that's a nuclear power site is monitored by the International Atomic Energy Agency. So at no point did they ever violate the treaty. They completely followed it. But regardless, the USA used that to say Iran is trying to develop an atomic bomb. And Iran is like, no, we're not. And you can look at every single site. We are not trying to develop an atomic bomb. We're just doing what we're allowed to do under the treaty, which is have, nuclear energy. And so then Israel waged this big campaign. Iran is trying to get the atomic bomb. And then one of the main things that happened is in 2006, Israel invaded Lebanon, right? Israel attacked Lebanon. And Hezbollah, C.P.I. to create local councils in the USA. All right. Hezbollah Hezbollah, which is an Iran-aligned organization in Lebanon. It's a Shia Muslim revolutionary organization in Lebanon. Hezbollah kicked Israel's ass. I mean, it just wiped the floor with Israel. Israel got driven the hell out of Lebanon. And the whole Muslim world was cheering for Hezbollah because Israel is so hated. I mean, wherever you go in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Qatar, Libya, anywhere, Syria, everyone hates Israel, right? Israel is seen as like the enemy of the Arab people, the enemy of the Persians, the enemy of the Kurds. Everyone hates Israel. So when Israel invaded Lebanon and Hezbollah just completely destroyed the Israeli army and just, drove them the hell out of Lebanon, at that moment, Iran was like the hero for the whole Middle East, right? All kinds of Muslims that were maybe, Sunni rather than Shia, or, ethnically didn't like the Persians. Persians and Arabs have this thing. Iran, because it's the Iranian aligned, has just wrecked Israel. Iran was surging ahead and the oil prices were high. I think that's when Press TV, the English language TV network from Iran that I used to work for, when they started broadcasting, they had an English language TV network, and Iran was like kind of surging ahead as a revolutionary country. And that was largely because of actions. I mean, the United States and Israel basically created a situation where suddenly people all over the Middle East started loving Iran. And part of the reason the Arab Spring happened, the way the Arab Spring was manipulated, part of the reason we had President Obama, Barack Hussein Obama, who went to a Muslim school, part of the reason that you had the Arab Spring and all of that, it was trying to rechange that. If Bush had stayed in office, Iran probably would have become like the symbol of anti-U.S. resistance. And if something like the Arab Spring had happened when Bush was president, Iran would have led it, and we probably would have had like 6 more Islamic republics, right? But because Obama was president, because Al Jazeera was able to manipulate it, it was about trying. Part of the reason Obama came into office was basically because Iran was so loved, across the Middle East, that Obama was like damage control. Obama came in and was trying to like confuse and divide the Muslim world. And under Obama's leadership, Saudi Arabia launched this whole campaign against Shia Muslims, the idea that Shia Muslims are not real Muslims, and that Iran is secretly trying to take over the world with Shia Islam, all of that, right? That was very much what Obama was. Obama was basically a modern day Napoleon. When Napoleon went to go take over the Middle East, he put up posters everywhere saying that he was a Muslim. He wasn't, but he was just hoping that people in the Middle East would buy that and align with him against the British. And that's what Obama was. It was, he faked out the Muslim world, tried to convince the Muslim world that I'm a guy who understands you. I, have a Middle Eastern middle name. I went to a Muslim school when I was a kid. It was all bullshit. It was all bullshit, right? But Obama, and then it was about manipulating the Arab Spring and using social media to to manipulate the Arab Spring. And I can get into that. I've talked about that on these streams before, but it's very important. But anyway, I guess I've said a lot about Iran. I could go on about Iran all day. I know a lot about it. So there you go. Do you agree with Russia's war in Ukraine? I think you mean, do I agree with NATO's war in Ukraine? Do I agree with what NATO has done by toppling the Ukrainian government in 2014 and installing a fanatically anti-Russian government, and then bombing the people of the eastern regions for 8 years straight, brutally destroying the people and bombing the people of Donetsk and Lugansk, not reintegrating them back into Iran into Ukraine like they agreed to do in the Minsk agreements, but instead imposing a food blockade, suppressing people in the eastern regions for speaking their own language. Do I agree that Russia is right to go in and protect these people after 8 years of them being bombed, after 8 years of the food blockade, after 8 years of not implementing the Minsk agreements? Sure, I think Russia's doing the right thing. I do think Russia's doing the right thing. I mean, I think they are. I don't. Any major country would do what Russia is doing at this point, right? If the U.S. if Russia toppled the government of Mexico, and then people that were sympathetic to the United States in Mexico started getting slaughtered, and for 8 years straight there was nothing but killing and food blockades and torture and etc. against the people of in Mexico that were sympathetic to the United States, eventually the United States would take some action, right? This is what any major country would do. Russia's doing the right thing. I think Russia's doing the right thing in Ukraine. It's sad. It's not a good situation. And I sympathize with everyone in Ukraine, whether they're in the Russian eastern regions or whether they're in Western Ukraine. I sympathize with everyone in Ukraine, what they're suffering. But what Russia's doing right now makes complete, perfect sense. The USA has been arming and cultivating neo-Nazi extremist groups. The USA has been building these bio labs that are tied with the Pentagon. I'm sorry, but yeah, any major country would respond this way. All right. Why does the USA elect weak, vulnerable presidents like George Bush and Biden? All right. Weak, vulnerable presidents like Bush and Biden. All righty. Very good. All right. Okay. Next question. Any plans for a CPI conference in Philadelphia? Not at the moment, but we do have a lot of people on the Eastern Seaboard, right? We have members in DC, we have members in New York, we have members in Pennsylvania. So it's something, yeah, again, if you're a local to Philadelphia and you want to help that happen, by all means, there isn't a local organizing committee in Philadelphia for CPI yet. So maybe if there are members in Philadelphia, they should start a local organizing committee. And then on that basis, maybe, one of our national leaders could come meet with you, and that could be the basis of eventually, having a CPI event in Philly. I'd be for that. But, we just don't have, at this point, we don't have people there. You have to have people on the ground to make these events happen. So there you go. All righty. All righty. Next question. Marcos in the Philippines. Well, Marcos was a brutal dictator backed by the United States. The United States, didn't want to see communism spread throughout the Pacific. There was a communist revolutionary, movement in the Philippines that was aligned with China. And because of that, the USA supported a brutal military dictatorship coming in. But just like the South Korean government of Park Chung-hee, just like the Shah of Iran, just like I'm trying to think of some other examples that, during the Cold War, especially all over Latin America, you had these like right-wing military strongmen that the United States supported as a barrier against communism. And at the end of the Cold War, and starting, the first example was Chile. Chile was like the beginning of it, but a lot of these governments that were aligned with the United States in the developing world, they did a lot of like Bonapartist stuff. The military would own factories. The military would create state-controlled corporations. And there was a lot of like government-controlled economic growth to stabilize the economy. You're going to have like a strongman military regime. There has to be a big layer of the population that benefits from it somehow. This is not a secret, right? I mean, this is Hitler, right? Hitler, in order to do what he did, right? He did horrendous things, but in order to do them, there had to be a layer of people in Germany who economically benefited, right? And the same in South Korea. Park Chung-hee, brutal dictator, did awful things, but the only way he could get the support to do it was he had to improve living standards for people in the cities. And that in order to have a authoritarian strongman regime, in order to do that, you have to have a very big percentage of the population that feels like they benefit from the actions of the leader, right? That's one thing. If a dictator is not handing out the goods, no one likes him, right? And that's generally how these things work. So during the Cold War, the United States tolerated all these dictators all over South America, Central America, Asia, right? The Asian tigers, all these like strongman dictatorships that did horrendous things, you know, murdered, rounded up communists and killed them, dropped communists out of airplanes, out of helicopters, and tortured people. But those guys, they were not free market people. And this is one of the biggest things that, like, you know, it's like the most, it's wildly delusional on the part of libertarians, is that they have it in their head that all these governments that were U.S. aligned, you know, during the Cold War, were all free market, and they weren't. South Korea, heavy state control. It was you know, Bonapartism, military Bonapartism, right? Park Chung-hee and Marcos was like that. Marcos was a military dictator, and he presided over some economic growth in the Philippines. You know, but it wasn't like, he wasn't a socialist by any means, but he was just this right-wing authoritarian strongman. And he did a lot of like handing out the goods. There was a layer of people in the Philippines who benefited from his leadership. Now, a lot of the people in the Philippines were poor and starving and didn't get anything out of it. A lot of the islands were brutally oppressed. And I mean, he was an awful, awful military dictator, but there was a layer of people in the cities who really benefited from his actions. He handed out the goods. He used the military to hand out goods to a certain section of the population. And after the Soviet Union started to decline, like late 80s, as the Soviet Union is starting to decline, the United States really escalates not needing these folks. You know, in Chile, Pinochet in 1973 was the first one of these dictators the USA installed who didn't do that, right? All these other dictators the USA supported around the world were kind of, you know, they were Bonapartists. Pinochet came in and he was a hatchet man. And Pinochet came in and he did an insane free market experiment in Chile and just privatized everything, right? You know, and Marcos was not Pinochet, right? And Lumpia Logic, you know, is saying, yeah, you know, under Marcos, they had manufacturing because he set it up, right? In order for Marcos to be the strongman military dictator, he had to do some stuff to improve people's lives. And so as the Cold War was coming to an end, the United States basically said, okay, this Marcos guy is getting in our way. And they replaced Marcos with neoliberalism. And this is what they do all over the world. This happened this happened in Latin America, in Bolivia, in Venezuela, you know, and that's what George Soros and the Open Society Institute are about, right? The Open Society is they want total free market capitalism. The only reason they had to tolerate these military strongmen guys who did, you know, quote unquote populist stuff sometimes, was because of the fact that they, you know, that they were the only surefire way of preventing communist revolution. But when the threat of communist revolution wasn't there, they could just bring in neoliberalism. And that's what you need to remember. So Marcos was not good. Marcos was a brutal US-backed dictator, killed all kinds of innocent people, committed crimes against humanity. But the USA tolerated him because of the fact that he stabilized the Philippines against communism. And as the threat of communist revolution decreased, at that point, the USA, you know, then basically enabled the Philippines to remove Marcos. You know, and the same for Rios Montt in Guatemala, the same for a lot of these guys, right? And this is what you need to remember, right? That you know, we talk about the USA being hypocritical for supporting dictators, but the USA toppled a lot of these dictators too. But it wasn't because they cared about human rights. It was because these dictators were an impediment to the free market, which they were. They were definitely that. They were an impediment to free market reforms, and that's important. Ross says, thank you for your solidarity from Ireland, says Ross Eon Cole on Rockfin. Well, thank you, Ross. I appreciate it. All right. Why is there still immigration to the USA despite USA collapsing? Well, the USA is nowhere near as collapsed as Mexico or as Central America. I mean, the USA is a fully industrialized, you know, imperialist country and yes, conditions here are deteriorating, but they're not deteriorating. We're nowhere near the conditions that people face in Central America after years of neoliberalism. We're nowhere near the conditions that people face in Mexico. You know, I mean, that's just the reality. I mean, we're an imperialist country in the center of the empire. So even though, yes, conditions are deteriorating, they have not deteriorated anywhere near the conditions that people in the colonized world face. So yeah, there you go. That's the question of that. Books on German banking. Well, Hitler's Banker, which is a book about Holomer Schacht. That's the book that really helped me understand the economics of Nazi Germany more than anything. Hitler's Banker is the biography of Holomer Schacht. It's very good. It helps you understand the economic basis of fascism. I learned a lot. I really became much more politically astute in my understanding of Bonapartism and politics after reading that book. As far as Otto Strasser, I mean, the Strasser brothers, they don't really matter, right? I mean, there's a book called like Germany, what is it? Germany Tomorrow that you can buy. That's like one of their writings. And then there's a biography. There's like a biography of Otto Strasser that was published in Britain during World War II. And I mean, Otto Strasser, they're not really a big deal. They were just, they were like, the Strasser brothers, Gregor Strasser and Otto Strasser, were two Nazi brothers who kind of believed in a much more socialist, in quotes, national socialism, right? As Hitler was getting ready to take power, he basically said that, all that National Socialism means is that the companies, the corporations have to be patriotic. And I guess Otto Strasser and Gregor Strasser, Marcos Jr. being president now, okay, Marcos Jr. being president now. That Gregor Strasser and Otto Strasser, that they were two Nazis who wanted a more socialistic version of Nazism. But if you read what they're all about, seething anti-Semitism, seething anti-communism, I don't, I don't think that they're somehow good, right? Flame of Liberation says Germany Tomorrow is one of the dumbest books ever written. Thank you. Yeah, they're not good, right? There's nothing good about them. They're just anti-Semitic Nazis who have more of a populist side to their rhetoric, basically. And I guess among Nazis, Strasserist is kind of like Trotskyite. It's like if you're a Nazi and they say you're really a communist pretending to be a Nazi, they call you a Strasserist. So there you go. Are they prepping us for a war against China? Yes, they are. Haas has made some very good remarks about that. Yes, and they're trying to make it sound anti-imperialist or anti-establishment, and it's not. And we need to be on top of that. I mean, Manuel Noriega. All right, I'll talk about Manuel Noriega. All right, in Panama, Manuel Noriega. What was I saying again? What were we talking about? Now it slipped out of my mind. I just thought about Manuel Noriega and oh boy. I was going to answer. There was a super chat I was going to answer and now I forgot what it was. Okay. Well, if someone remembers what super chat I was about to answer, I'll answer it. But there you go. Well, we were talking about the Strasser brothers, and so we talked about that. Okay. How might a government of action wrestle control away from Wall Street? Well, we have our 4-point plan. If you go to cpiusa.org, we have our 4-point plan. And it's about building popular support and educating people about these 4 measures that could be implemented. The government could implement the 4 policies that we list, the 4 things, which are mass mobilization to rebuild the country, public control of our natural resources, public control of banking, and an economic bill of rights. The government could implement those things, but they won't. And the reason they won't implement them is because it would push back too much of Wall Street power. So it's about raising awareness about the fact the government could do these 4 things, demanding that the government, should, do those 4 things, building up popular support for those 4 things among the public, laying the basis for movements, demanding those 4 things to be built. That's how we would lay the basis for some kind of anti-monopoly government to emerge that could do those 4 things. All right. Was Napoleon a positive figure? Well, he's one of these figures that's a little bit tricky. All right. Like Oliver Cromwell, right? Now, Oliver Cromwell I'm comparing him to Oliver Cromwell, right? Oliver Cromwell, if you're a colonized person, if you're an Irish person, you spit when you hear Oliver Cromwell's name. Brutal mass murderer, murdered millions of Irish people, committed genocide against the Irish people. But in England, Oliver Cromwell was a revolutionary figure. He represented the bourgeois revolution overthrowing feudalism. He was, He was a religious fanatic who, basically the parliament was waging war against the king. The king was aligned with the Church of England, and he was aligned with the old, aristocrats and nobles, and the parliament was aligned with the new capitalist class. And so, in order to defeat the new capitalist class, the parliament had to build kind of an army, an uprising of the people. And so, Oliver Cromwell was this religious fanatic, this Puritan who believed that he was going to create kingdom of God on earth and was going to stand with the oppressed and all of this. And so Oliver Cromwell emerged. And Oliver Cromwell, I mean, eventually he became he was like the king. They didn't call him a king, though. He was the Lord and Protector. He was like the military dictator of England for a few years before he died. Oliver Cromwell was a fanatic, and he was fighting for the people, and he was fighting against the old nobility. He was fighting for religious freedom and freedom of conscience in a lot of ways against the Church of England. He was fighting, for in a lot of ways, a society where people got to vote and elect their leaders, and expanding suffrage. And there was kind of an upsurge of democracy. Pamphlets were being published. The printing press was very new, and that in England, Oliver Cromwell represented a step forward for democratic rights, and it was the bourgeois revolution overturning feudalism. So in England, Cromwell was pretty good. In Ireland and in the colonized countries, Oliver Cromwell was a mass murderer, right? So it's complex, right? And the same goes for Napoleon, right? Napoleon's crimes against the people of Haiti, you can't support that. Napoleon's crimes against the people of Africa and the Middle East, you can't support that. But in France and in Europe, Napoleon played a somewhat positive role. That, basically the French Revolution had happened, and the French Revolution was chaotic, right? The French Revolution, they came in, they overthrew feudalism, and out of feudalism, then they had the Reign of Terror, and they were executing people, and it was chaos. And then Napoleon marched into power, and he compromised with the old regime, right? The French Revolution had gone so far, and it was so chaotic that basically, in order to keep capitalism in power and to solidify the new regime, he compromised, right? And he didn't overturn capitalist property relations. It stayed capitalist. It didn't go back to feudalism. But he brought back the Catholic Church. He made it a Roman Catholic country again. He made the Napoleonic Code, which was like the law of the country. And he eventually declared himself to be the emperor. So he was like the king, but it was now a capitalist country. And he kind of proclaimed the ideals of the French Revolution, but he toned them down quite a bit. And because after the French Revolution, all the feudal countries had invaded France and not respected France's sovereignty, he then built up an army that not only kicked out the foreign invaders, but started expanding the ideals of the French Revolution across Europe. And that's why a lot of progressive people thought Napoleon was awesome. Like Beethoven, right, really liked Napoleon. Immanuel Kant really liked Beethoven. And a lot of people, really liked Napoleon. And then Napoleon was seen as this he was the revolution in boots. He was marching the ideals of the French Revolution across Europe. And the British didn't like him because he was challenging British domination of the world. I believe he was actually, it's kind of interesting. Now there's this whole thing about the Rothschilds, which are a real family, right? But if you bring them up, they say you're anti-Semitic. But the first person to start calling out the Rothschilds was Napoleon, actually. Napoleon started talking about how the British people, there's this family called the Rothschilds, these Rothschilds bankers that are trying to rule the world, and he's fighting the Rothschilds, and Napoleon was, and he did believe in a much more state-controlled capitalism. He argued that, the government should facilitate industries. And, in some ways you could argue that Napoleon, was, that he was a progressive. However, what he did to the Russians wasn't good, right? What he did to the Russians was awful, right? And he invaded Russia, and he killed all kinds of Russian people and was driven out of Russia. And the defeat of Napoleon is considered one of the greatest moments in Russian history. So these are complex figures. The bourgeois revolutions are complicated, right? It's like, what do you think of George Washington? Well, what he did to his slaves wasn't good, and what he did to Native Americans wasn't good. But was George Washington a good figure in the history of the United States? It's complicated. It's complicated. He was a very bad figure in the way he treated slaves and promoted slavery and practiced slavery. He was a very bad figure in that, part of the American Revolution, if you read the Declaration of Independence, was the British are holding us back from going and killing all the Native Americans and expanding westward. We want to expand westward and kill all the Native Americans, and the British won't let us, so that wasn't good. But, George Washington also was for economic development of the United States and didn't want the United States to be, completely under the dominion, just a trading hub. Basically, the British just wanted the United States to be a trading hub in the British Empire. And the American Revolution, it was a lot of people in the United States who wanted a lot of different things, but they all kind of agreed that they wanted the United States to not just be a trading hub in the British Empire. They wanted the United States to have its own economy. That's why Alexander Hamilton was all about the lighthouses and the industry and the National Bank. They wanted the United States to expand westward, which meant killing a lot of Native Americans. They wanted, the United States to have its own industries. It was complicated, but the American Revolution was largely fought because the British were not going to allow the USA to have its own economy, right? So is it a good thing that the United States has its own economy? Yeah, it's a good thing that the United States was able to have its own economy. Unfortunately, the United States has become an imperialist country that is exploiting people all over the world. The way the United States was created was with genocide against Native Americans. So we're not for that. But, the basic thesis of the American Revolution, should this country have had its own economy? Yes. Yes, it should have, right? So Napoleon, right? Should the French Revolution have been overturned and feudalism brought back in France? No. Napoleon was necessary in order to prevent that, right? He walked in and he was kind of, the thermidor, I guess, the compromise with the old system, the strong man who emerged from the chaos of the Reign of Terror and consolidated French capitalism, and then started expanding the ideals of the French Revolution across Europe. I view that in a positive light. Right now, I don't like what he did in Russia. I don't like what he did in the Caribbean. I don't like what he did in Africa. But what he did, what he did in Europe, for the most part, his role in Germany, his role fighting the British was good, right? That's kind of my position, and that's why with the bourgeois revolutionaries, it's complicated because as Karl Marx wrote, the bourgeoisie came into the world with with fangs dripping with blood, right? That the bourgeois revolution. That's why it's bullshit. Right? Whenever anyone gives you this line about, oh, socialism is theft. Socialism is theft. The capitalists work for what they have, and socialism is about stealing. Bullshit. Capitalism was created with mass theft, right? They stole America from the Native Americans. They stole African people in the transatlantic slave trade, and they stole the land from the peasants, drove the peasants off the land, and cleared out the commons to create private property in the countryside and kicked all the people off the estates. Oh my gosh. And they stole Africa with colonialism, and capitalism began with one of the biggest episodes of mass theft that you've ever seen. Enclosure, colonialism, slavery, give me a break. So anyone who says to you, oh, socialism's theft, capitalism began, the origins of capitalism, what Karl Marx called primitive accumulation, is one of the greatest examples of mass theft and genocidal murderous theft. They didn't just steal from people, they killed them in mass. That's what it is. So there you go. So Napoleon's a complex figure, but in France, he played a positive role, I would argue. All right. In Italy and Germany, social democracy led to fascism. Is post-World War II era in the USA the long period of social democracy before fascism? No, I don't accept that analysis. Would you recommend green card holders to join C.P.I, or should they get citizenship first? And do you have anything going on down in Florida? Okay, that is a strange question. Right, but we'll answer that. Green card holders get C.P.I membership. Anything in Florida? All righty. Right. Before Hitler came to power in Germany, so Germany was an imperialist country. It fought World War I. There was a big socialist movement in Germany. Germany had the biggest socialist movement of any country in the world before World War I. But the leaders of the socialist movement were a bunch of sellouts and traitors, and they supported the war. The war happened. At the end of the war, basically, they were losing the war, and the Kaiser said, all right, and he ordered the Navy to go do one last suicide mission before they surrendered. And the Navy said no, and the sailors on the ships killed their officers, and you had an uprising. a revolt of the people. And then that spread to the German military, and soldiers were overthrowing their officers. And in various places throughout Germany, you had workers' councils declaring themselves the government. And, you had, like, it was like a socialist revolution that happened in Germany in 1918 at the end of World War I. However, that socialist revolution elected a constituent assembly to go and write the new constitution for Germany. And the new constitution was written by social democrats. And they basically decided, we're not going to write a socialist constitution for Germany. And so instead of writing a socialist constitution, they wrote a capitalist constitution. And they said, well, basically, if the people elect a socialist government, then we can have it. But they didn't write a revolutionary constitution. They did not create a workers' republic in the aftermath of their revolution. And Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, they continued to protest and demand that. And so the social democrats killed them. And in Bavaria, the people of Bavaria rose up and briefly declared the Bavarian Soviet Republic, which was like a workers' revolutionary government in Bavaria. And that was put down. And, the German workers had a socialist revolution, but the leaders of the socialist parties, of the Social Democratic Party, stabbed it in the back. And, they basically wrenched defeat from the jaws of victory. It was one of the biggest, it was unbelievable. You had one of the most powerful countries in the world has a socialist revolution. The government is overthrown. The workers rise up. They elect a bunch of Marxists to go write the Constitution. And the Marxists turned around and wrote a capitalist constitution. And then, one province says, well, no, we actually want to have socialism. And so then they go and murder them. And Rosa Luxemburg says, no, we actually want to have socialism. And so they murder her. And so never had you seen an example of socialism failing more than that. The socialist movement was basically handed a victory. And out of this victory, they managed to lose. And at that point, after World War I, at that point, Marxism in Germany was doomed. Because at that point, they'd already had their revolution. The people had been through the horrors of World War I. They had lost World War I. They had brought the socialists and Marxists to power. And the Marxists and socialists had utterly failed. Just completely and utterly failed. And so because of that, the Marxists were discredited. So like that was the first thing. So then you had about 10 years, like 15 years from the end of World War I until Hitler came to power. And it was 10 years of economic suffering, right? The Weimar Republic, the constitution that was created, that wasn't the socialist constitution, the capitalist constitution, created the Weimar Republic. You had a lot of socialists who got elected to office, throughout Germany. Many of the major cities in Germany were run by the Social Democratic Party, a lot of labor unions that were socialists. And then you had the Communist Party. And the Communist Party very much felt the Social Democrats had sold out the revolution and were their enemies. So you had a lot of very, very desperately poor unemployed people. And the communists started recruiting the desperately poor unemployed people. And the Social Democrats, they were the party of people who still had jobs and worked in factories, factory workers, and the labor unions. So the Social Democrats became more and more reformist. And they said, basically, the reason people hate communism is because Bolshevism is so bad. They said, our main enemy is on the left. Meanwhile, you had the communists became more and more ultra-left because these people are poor and they're struggling and they're desperately poor and they're hungry. They've got nothing to lose but their chains. So, these are two Marxist groups, the Social Democrats and the communists. They're moving like way far away from each other. One is like a left adventurist party that is engaging in like armed struggle, basically. Bluts May in 1928, they seized control of the vetting district in Berlin. And it's like, it's like they have a revolution. They have an armed revolution, basically, for a few weeks in Germany. They have a militia, and then, you have the Social Democrats, and the Social Democrats, they're becoming more and more reformist and they're murdering communists in the streets, etc. And after a little while, it became clear the communists were never going to take power. All right. There were multiple communist uprisings, but none of them ever took power. And then Nazism originated as a counter gang to kill communists, right? It was that in order to put down, the uprisings, the Marxist uprisings that came after World War I, They built these armies of like what they called free officers or Freikorps, and they were like former soldiers who were used to brutally put down communist uprisings. They were right-wing soldiers. Among those guys, the Freikorps, you had different kind of theories about why they would do what they did, right? Again, it was just, well, we're, working for the capitalists to defeat the communists, but they had to come up with a theory about why. And so you had like, some of them were into like Oswald Spengler and Ernst Juncker and Prussian socialism. And it's out of this mess of weird right-wing parties to justify brutally putting down communist uprisings. Out of that mess, you got the Nazi Party. And the Nazi Party was originally backed by British intelligence, and it was just there to fight the communists. But as the Nazi Party gained its strength, Hitler met with Hallemer-Schacht, and eventually the feeling was to stabilize Germany and prevent any threat of communist revolution. They were going to have this military dictatorship. They were going to have the Nazi fascist state. That's not what's happening in the United States at all. And in Italy, again, there was a lot of social democrats in Italy. World War I happened. After World War I, there was a revolutionary uprising that failed. And then in the instability, the ruling class ultimately put Mussolini into power. But again, like, these are countries where there is huge revolutionary turmoil and uprisings going on. These are countries where the communists have again and again failed to prove that they could actually win. That's not the situation by any means that we have in the United States. And that in the United States, I wouldn't call, post World War II years social democracy by any means. There was a bigger welfare state, but we never really had social democracy in the United States. I mean, we never had presidents that were saying that they were turning the USA to be socialist. If Bernie Sanders got elected president, then we could say we live under social democracy. But compared to the British Labour Party or anything, the USA has never really had left-wing leadership since Roosevelt. And even the Roosevelt years, Roosevelt wasn't even as much of a social democrat as a lot of these European folks are. So I would say we've never really had social democracy in the United States. So that analogy doesn't work. I mean, in a lot of ways, yes, the failures of social democracy do strengthen fascism, but we're just living in a very, very, very different time. New inventions under socialism. We're living in a very, very different time. All right. New inventions under socialism. All right. We've got a lot of super chats to get through, so we're just going to go boom, boom, boom. China's opinion on Trotskyism. Well, China is generally anti-Trotskyism, right? The Trotskyites said the Chinese Revolution didn't have any potential. My understanding is in China, Bukharin is very popular. They reject both Stalin and Trotsky. They like Bukharin. But the Chinese Communist Party is quite critical of Trotskyism, from what I understand. I do know that in Hong Kong, there's some trot guy, right? Some trot politician in Hong Kong who's got kind of a cult following. Who's a Trotskyite. He's like in Socialist Alternative. He goes by long hair or something like that. And I think he has a following. But for the most part, Trotskyism in China is not popular. I will say that I bought a compilation of Trotsky's writings on China that was printed in India, which I thought was interesting because a lot of Marxists in India were studying Trotsky's position on China. Sorry, the allergies this time of year. My throat is just tickling like crazy. All right, next question. Is democratic centralism part of Iranian socialism? Iran doesn't call its system socialist. Iran does not use Marxist language to describe their system. Iran rejects Marxism. They say it's not capitalism, but Islam. So, I don't know what you're getting at there. Right? Democratic centralism is a theory that Lenin developed in order to build the Bolshevik Party. It's about how the Bolshevik Party operated, and that when they keep their debates internal, and that any disagreement they have is in the party. And then once a decision is made, all members are obligated to carry it out, whether they agree or disagree. Democratic centralism is that the party marches as one in unison, and one face to the masses. So I don't know how, Iran is not led by Marxists. Iran does not call their system socialist. So I don't know why they would use Leninist. I don't even know what you're getting at there. It's a strange question. All right. The son of the Shah has U.S. federal support. Well, yeah. Well, the Pahlavists are very much one of the pro-imperialist, pro-Zionist counter gangs that exist. You go to LA, there's a lot of, Pahlavists, people that were in with the monarchy of Iran that fled after the revolution. And those folks are, living in Southern California right now, and they have lots of money, and they're wealthy, and they're right wing, and they support Trump, and they hate Iran, and they want to overthrow the Iranian government, and they support Israel. And I don't know what to say about them. They're not good folks, but they're a counter gang. They're in U.S. politics. And the USA will throw them a bone a lot. I noticed the Wall Street Journal published op-eds by them, and that they will get, there is an Iranian nationalist current that wants to restore them to the throne. And that seems to be one of the main pro-US factions trying to overthrow the Iranian government, are Pahlavists. All right. My favorite Iranian food, shishlik. I love shishlik. These lamb on the bone, amazing stuff. The way they would cook it, they do their lamb amazingly. Shishlik, I could eat shishlik all the time. That is some good meat. I'll tell you that much. I love shishlik. I also really like, they have this yogurt that is it's got shallot. It's like a kind of like a mild onion they have in Iran, and it makes this really good yogurt with shallot. It's amazing. I could eat that stuff all day long too. Good stuff. Great stuff. All right. C.P.I. create local councils in the USA. No, C.P.I. is an educational think tank. All right. We're not a party. And that C.P.I. will be a part of what will come, but we won't be what will come. We're not the vanguard. We are not the party. All right. We're not the party. We're not the vanguard. We're not the Soviets. We're an educational think tank. We will do educational work. We will train people. We will inspire people, but we are not, we're not Superman. All right. Workers' councils are things that will arise in the process of people getting inspired to fight for the kind of things that CPI teaches people about, like our 4-point plan, like anti-imperialism. And as people become more aware of these concepts, as people embrace these concepts, as organizations and activist movements fighting for these concepts like Medicare for all, or education for all, or public control of banking, as these kinds of movements emerge, yes, councils will come into existence. But if we were to announce as CPI, oh, we're forming these councils, that would just be silly LARPing. That's why we never called ourselves a party. After I left the Workers' World Party, a lot of people were like, Caleb, you got to go start your own party. No, because it would be a joke, because the Workers' World Party is a joke, and the PSL is a joke, and the CPUSA is a joke. None of these parties mean jack shit, okay? None of them mean jack shit, okay? They're all irrelevant. Average Americans have never even heard of these parties. They've never met anyone from these parties, right? And, all these little tiny, socialist groups, they don't mean anything. They're just people playing dress up and going, I want to pretend I'm the Bolsheviks. And they're not that, okay? And if you're serious, you have to understand that a real revolutionary party that leads millions of people into struggle, that has a chance of actually leading the country, looks completely different than anything that any of these groups are doing. CPI is an educational group that I believe will disseminate ideas, will agitate, will propagate, will teach people concepts that will, I hope, eventually lead to something like the party happening. Something like the party emerging, something like the Workers' Council that we knew we need emerging. Eventually, yes, something like that will happen. But right now, no. And the thing is, you can't just do that. If you declare Soviets, it's a joke, right? But if the people were actually in a state of revolt, if there were huge demonstrations and strikes going on in the United States, imagine if in every major city there were people occupying buildings of private insurance companies, right? That if every private insurance company, there were all kinds of protesters that would chain themselves to the door and, demanding Medicare for all or whatever. And this was happening in every major city. Every major health insurance company had its doors chained shut by revolutionary activists. And the police were being sent in to drag these revolutionary activists away. And so assemblies of people that supported the people that were shutting down the healthcare companies were emerging, and that they would meet every day. How do we, that's the situation. That group that would be supporting, some kind of revolutionary upsurge of activism of the people. That's what a Workers' Council would be. That's what a community assembly would be. It wouldn't be me declaring it as CPI, right? That these kinds of institutions, they argue, tips for arguing socialism graphic design idea. I don't even know what that means. I don't even know what that means. But Stalin liked Shishlik also. Well, he had good taste. But that a real revolutionary upsurge, right? That's where these kind of things come from. And that, these kind of things are created in the process of real mass struggles taking place. That's how these things emerge. And a revolutionary party is a group of thousands of people who operate in a democratic, centralist manner to intervene in some real mass struggle. We don't have anything like that in the United States right now. CPI, my hope is that maybe we will, with our educational work, lay the basis for something like that to come eventually. And if a revolutionary party emerged, it would by necessity have something like CPI, right? It would have to have an educational wing, that would exist, and it would probably have an electoral wing that ran in elections. It would have an activist wing. It would have a labor union wing. And so, yes, eventually, as something like the Revolutionary Party emerges, CPI will probably be part of a whole machinery that emerges. But we're not in that period yet. We're just at the very beginning of a crisis. I think I compare the period we're in to the Great Awakening. The Great Awakening. Before you had the American Revolution, you had the Great Awakening. Before you had the U.S. Civil War, you had the Second Great Awakening. It was a period where the consciousness of the people expanded. That's the period we're in. We're at the very beginning of a revolutionary period, right? And now talk of socialism is widespread. It wasn't before. The crisis is becoming deeper. We have Bonapartist struggles among the elite. We're moving in a period in which a revolutionary crisis could emerge, but we're not there yet. And in the process of the period that we're in, there will be revolutionary struggles that will emerge, and CPI will be doing educational work and possibly laying the basis for something to emerge. But we have to be realistic, and it's really important for people to have a realistic assessment, right? They talk about when you're a little baby, you think you're the most powerful person in the world, right? You think you're the most powerful person in the world because all you have to do is cry and you get what you want, right? You cry, you get what you want, right? And so a part of becoming an adult is starting to realize your own strength. They talk about teenagers, they spill things a lot because they're not used to their body being the size that it is. And so they turn with their elbow and they knock over a drink, or they trip and they fall because they don't know exactly how big they are. They're growing a lot. And so they're not totally familiar with how big their body is. And that part of maturity is realizing what you are actually capable of. And that when we're young, we often have a very exaggerated sense of our own capabilities. When you're a baby, you think that you're the most powerful thing in the world, right? And part of coming into adulthood is realizing, okay, this is what I'm capable of, and this is what I'm not capable of. And that doesn't mean you should aim low, right? And I mean, please, by all means, don't aim low. And don't misinterpret me. You should always be aiming high and always trying to do the best you can. You should always be aspiring to something bigger. But in order to pursue it in a rational way, you have to have your feet on the ground while you look at the sky, right? If you never look at the sky, you're never going to achieve anything. But if you look at the sky, but you never have your feet on the ground, you're never going to get anywhere, right? You have to look at the sky with your feet on the ground. That's what you need to do. And if you can look at the sky, but keep your feet on the ground while you do it, then you'll get someplace. I've told this story before, but I was just thinking about it the other night. It's an interesting story because, I remember when I was in Cleveland, I had two communist friends. They were both my age. I think one was younger and one was the same age as me. And we're riding in the car together. And it's really funny. I think about this now and I'm just like, wow. But we're riding in the car together, and I had just given a speech at a rally against police brutality. I'd given a speech at a rally against police brutality, and people had applauded, and a couple people said, "Oh, Caleb, you should run for mayor. You should run for mayor." So I got into the car with my two communist friends. I said, maybe I should run for mayor. Maybe someday, I could be like the socialist mayor of Cleveland. And my two friends were just completely nasty to me. Like, oh, that could never happen, blah, 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 blah. I got really mad at them. I'm like, what is wrong with you guys? And it's funny because I look back at that now and like, I'm not mayor of Cleveland, right? But where have I gone in my life? Well, I am an international reporter. I have been to many countries. I've written many books. I'm leading a mass socialist organization. And part of my ability to keep going was to look ahead and say, be constantly testing the waters of what is possible, right? And I said, well, maybe I could be mayor of Cleveland someday. And they were, but these two people, where are they? Right? These two people that, I guess they were just so much more realistic. Oh, that could never happen. And they were just being so rude to me. Where are they? Well, one of them is, well, I don't even want to say where he is. I mean, he's not doing too well. And I guess the other one, at risk of, I'm not going to tell other people's personal business, but neither of them have gotten very far. Let me just put it that way. Right. And the reason that they've not gotten very far is because of the fact that they don't know how to look up. Right. You have to be able to look up. If you can't look up, you can't really achieve anything. Sure, I'm not the mayor of Cleveland, but I've achieved a damn lot. If you look at what I've achieved in the last 10 years, I went from starving in Cleveland to Occupy Wall Street to appearing on international television to, creating an international incident on a ship in the Gulf of Aden to being a featured speaker at international communist conferences to, intervening in politics around the world, if you look at my reputation, I've done a lot. And it's because I have this ability to look up. I'm constantly going, what is possible? What can be achieved? And there's a lot of people who just don't do that. They don't know how to look up. Right. And they just sit there and it's like, yeah, it's like, okay, and who knows? Like if I had stayed in Cleveland and somehow found a way to survive, and who knows? Who knows? Maybe I could be mayor of Cleveland right now. That's not the way my life took me. But the fact that I was able to envision that after a couple people said it to me, that is what enabled me to keep going. And whenever somebody tries to stifle your vision, they're not your friend. Anyone who says that, anyone who says that growth is bad, whether it's your personal growth, whether it's the growth of society, anyone who tries to tell you growth is bad is trying to kill you. And that's a really important thing. If there's somebody in your life who is constantly telling you not to expand, constantly telling you not to grow, trying to poo-poo your ability to expand, they're not your friend. They are trying to kill you. So there you go. And another thing that I'll remember, and this is an interesting moment, this was a big moment for me, is I remember, when I was in the Workers' World Party, Bernie Sanders was running for president. And I was very angry because they were always saying, oh, you can't talk about socialism. No one's interested in that. Only white men are interested in socialism, blah, blah, blah. And Bernie Sanders was running for president and talking about socialism. And I said, look, they should be hearing socialism from us, not from Bernie Sanders. And if we were not just, doing stupid liberal protests all the time, if we were actually going to people with socialism, they'd be learning real socialism and not DSA liberal crap. And I said this, and I remember this older lady in the Workers' World Party said to me, she said, how could you think that we would ever be as big as Bernie Sanders? And I said, I'm sorry, aren't we supposed to be taking power someday? I mean, I'm sorry, aren't we the vanguard? The Revolutionary Party is supposed to be taking party. You're saying, how could we ever be possibly as big as Bernie Sanders? I must be in the wrong group. If this group never thinks it's capable of being as big as one single U.S. senator, I'm in the wrong fucking group because I want to see socialism actually come to the United States. And that was like a moment of realization when she said, oh, wow. And I mean, how could you think we would ever be as big as Bernie Sanders? That's ridiculous. It's like, well, you just laid out why your group has no fucking future, right? And that was like an alarm bell that should have gone off in my head. I mean, if you're in a socialist group and they don't seem to have a real plan from getting to point A to point B, they're not worth your time, right? We have a real plan. We have a 4-point plan. We have a realistic assessment of what we're capable of doing. We are capable of providing socialist education to people. And our hope is that people will take up what we're about. The ideas that we're promoting will spread among the masses. Entities like the People's Party will get stronger. Militant labor unionists like Chris Smalls will become more radical and more powerful. Struggles against the low-wage police state will expand. The movement's Medicare for all, but we realize we're not going to do it. We are an educational group. We have a realistic assessment of our goals, but we're constantly thinking about how to get there. right? And when people sit there and they try to tell you, oh, I mean, they're not serious. I mean, you're with the wrong people. You're with the wrong people. Let me just put it that way. All right, next question. Why does the USA elect vulnerable, weak presidents like Bush and Biden? I don't think Bush was a vulnerable, weak president. I mean, Bush was an awful president. He was a mass murderer. He was a horrendous leader, austerity, neoliberalism, cutbacks, religious fanaticism, imperialist wars. It was an awful president, but weak. I mean, Bush got almost everything he wanted. Name one thing Bush tried to push through he didn't get. I mean, Bush. I'm sorry, but in terms of getting shit done, it was not good shit. It was evil shit, but Bush got it done. Biden, on the other hand, Biden is very much like Biden is optics. They want the USA to look that way right now because they're setting up for a war against Russia and China. And they don't want to look like the aggressor. And so in order to not look like the aggressor, they need a president who's like, oh boy, I'm Joe Biden. I'm Joe Biden, man. I'm tired. It's part of the optics. They need a guy who's fallen down the stairs. They're trying to make the USA not look scary while they psych us up for World War III. If they had a president who looked like Hitler, then it would be very easy for Russia and China to point to the United States and say, see, you got a screaming madman waving his arms. But it's very hard. The USA is trying its hardest to not look like the aggressor while it provokes a war in Ukraine, while it sets up to provoke a war in Taiwan. That's what's going on there. All right. All right. Marcos Jr. being president now. Yeah, I saw that. We'll see what kind of president he is. I mean, his father was not very good. But it's clear that the USA didn't like him. So yes, I saw that already. I already wrote it down. It's on the list. Don't worry. Already on the list. But I mean, we'll see what kind of president he is, but he doesn't come from a good legacy. The thing is, though, there's nostalgia in the Philippines. Just like, now in the Dominican Republic, a lot of people have nostalgia for Trujillo, the brutal dictator of the Dominican Republic. Why? Because he was kind of an economic Bonapartist. And under Trujillo, and that's the thing, these Bonapartist regimes that existed during the Cold War had better economic circumstances than what neoliberalism is offering. All righty. Next question. Manuel Noriega. Manuel Noriega. Manuel Noriega was the military strongman the USA supported in Panama. He was the military dictator of Panama. The USA armed him. He was supporting the moves against Nicaragua and such. But he basically, became independent and started taking populist moves and nationalizing things and started moving against the United States. And so in the name of stopping drugs, the USA invaded Panama and removed him. There's a great documentary about it called The Panama Deception. A lot of people that I used to work with in the Workers' World Party are in that documentary. They interview them about Noriega, and International Action Center, Ramsey Clark, who I used to work for, met with Noriega and I think defended Noriega, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, he was the military strongman. Oh, 10. Is that a meme? Is that a meme? Does that mean something? I don't know what that means, but I'll take it. So there you go. And he was an example of, one of these leaders the USA backed up who wouldn't go along with neoliberalism, took economic populist moves, so they removed him and put in neoliberalism. So there you go. Panama Deceptions, a great movie. Watch it. All right. Green card holders get C.P.I. membership. Well, I mean, look, if you're getting a green card, you can make your own decisions. C.P.I. is a legal organization. We do not do anything illegal. We are not a lobby organization. We do not lobby people. We're not involved in any lobbying activity. We're not even really an activist group. We're an educational group. So we're not leading protests or getting people arrested or anything like that. We're an educational group. So if U.S. leaders are upfront and honest, they should have no problem with you as a green card holder being involved with us because we're not doing anything illegal. That said, is it possible that because C.P.I. espouses socialist and Marxist politics that they could give you some trouble? I mean, I don't know. Possibly. But if U.S. leaders are fully complying with the law, there should be no problem with you as a green card holder being involved. You're welcome to join. We don't require our members be U.S. citizens, right? You can be a non-citizen in the United States and be a member of C.P.I. That's not a problem. We don't bar people on the basis of citizenship. So you're welcome to join. And we do have a number of members in Florida, actually. And we actually, one of our organizers in Florida, we just gave him a list of every member in Florida, and he called them up on the phone. Some of the Florida members, I think, are planning to come to the National Training School in Kansas. So if you go ahead and join, your information will get passed on to the Florida members. You'll probably get a phone call, and they'll organize you from there. So yeah, that's my advice to you. Join the C.P.I. We want to have 1K by May. So there you go. Causes of mass shootings. I argue it's rooted in the breakdown of U.S. society. It's rooted in the mental health crisis facing young men, the kind of weird identity crisis that a lot of young men have. It's rooted in the fact that there's a crisis of masculinity in the United States, that we're suddenly being told, don't be a toxic masculine person. We're suddenly being told that, the way men act is not acceptable. And so young men, suddenly their masculinity is kind of in crisis. But at the same time, society is offering a lot less opportunity. There's an expectation that young men go out on their own, get a good paying job, get married, get their wife pregnant, have 3 children, become the breadwinner of a household. And that's not possible for a lot of young men. And they feel a lot of shame around that. Meanwhile, society is suddenly saying that a lot of the masculine rituals that society used to go through, like bullying, etc., society is suddenly saying those things are bad, but they still also go on. And so a lot of young men, and then we have a lot of video games, we have a lot of, militarism and war is being widely promoted in our society. At the same time, we're getting this weird mixed woke message, and we're told about toxic masculinity, and a lot of young men don't know who they are, don't know what they're supposed to do with their life, don't know what they're supposed to believe in, don't even know what it means to be a man at this point, right? What does it mean to be a man in the United States? It used to be there were very clear expectations about what men were supposed to do. Now it's not clear. It's not clear what men are supposed to do, what it means to be a man. And so men are really confused. They are really, really, really confused. It's really interesting to think about, but it's like when you read about Freud and the Oedipus complex, right? We know about the Oedipus complex, right? Freud argued that every man has a desire to murder his father and marry his mother, right? And obviously, people say, well, that's bullshit. But really, I mean, the idea is that the way the traditional patriarchal family works, right, is that when the father is like the king of the house, right? And I'm not saying this is good. This is bad. Trust me, this is bad. But the father is kind of the king of the house. And when you're a young man, you're kind of like worshiping your father. No, I didn't say that. And you kind of worship your father when you're a child, right? You think your father is the coolest guy. You want to be your father. Your father is big and strong. Your mother, oh, she's a woman. She's weak. She's not as strong as your father. So you got to worship your father. But then you hit adolescence. And then all of a sudden, your father is the dominant, man in the household, but you have testosterone and you want to be the dominant man in the household. So you and your father, when you're a teenager, have this like battle of masculine authority where you're constantly trying to assert that you can be the man, and your father is saying, no, I am the man. And you have this battle of masculine authority. Where you are constantly trying to undermine your father's authority and prove that you're better than him. And thank you, Dan Keating, for the super chat. Whereas your father is always trying to find ways to humiliate you and demasculinize you to try and prove that he is still the legitimate authority of the household. And eventually, the idea is that you're supposed to hate your father so much that eventually, he's degraded and humiliated and shamed you so much, and you've gotten on his nerves so much and challenged his authority so much that eventually you go out into the world, and you are supposed to go out into the world and go out and achieve all kinds of great things to prove to your father that he was wrong about you, right? That he was wrong about you, that you're not, you're not weak. He was trying to show your mother that you were weak and that he was the strong one, and you're supposed to go out in the world and you're supposed to, be desperate to prove how strong and tough you are to show your father that he was wrong to degrade and humiliate you that way. And this is totally fucked up. And this is, you want to talk about mental illness, right? I mean, this is all the things we associate with quote unquote toxic masculinity. They're associated with this. I mean, this is not a healthy way of being. right? So this is not good. I'm not defending this. This is when Freud talks about the Oedipus complex. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about the fact that, you know, when you're a child, you kind of worship your dad, and the man is the head of the household, and you aspire to be your dad. But then when you've got testosterone and you're an adolescent, you're battling for his authority, and he is looking to, you know, degrade you and emasculate you and castrate you. Basically, that's what Freud says. And then you're looking to murder him and castrate him and you know, and marry your mother or something. And there's this testosterone battle, you know, between you and your father that ultimately leads to you going out into the world, and you have, you know, and that's why they say young men have something to prove, especially teenage boys. They always want to fight. You ever meet teenage boys? They always want to fight. They're always, oh yeah, you talking to me? You know, it's about this, right? And this is completely fucked up. And a lot of mental illness that we see as a society is rooted in this kind of behavior. Bullying, sexual assault of women, right? A lot of times guys that sexually assault women, it's like they're trying to prove that they're, you know, it's like they're sexually assaulting women to try and prove something to their fathers, which is fucked up. You know, a lot of the problems with men, you know, violent crime, you know, all of this, you know, is rooted in this Oedipus stuff, right? Where it's like the battle between the young man and his father. But in a lot of ways, though, because this was so normal, we like incarnate, we like put this into society. You know, I mean, this just became part of, you know, for example, the military, right? The Marines, right? What is that? Run away and join the Marines. You can't stand your dad anymore, right? You want to prove to your dad that, you know, you are strong. Well, you run away and you join the military and you become a big, strong military guy. The Marines, the military, the armies for young men, that's all about, it plays into that like it fits it like a glove. Right. There's many examples of this, right? That a lot of institutions that we built up in our society are specifically designed, you know, designed to cultivate this kind of thinking, right? You know, it's like, okay, we assume that young men are going to have this rage at their fathers. We assume that fathers are going to have this rage at young men, and we almost actively cultivate it, right? And, you know, we invent rituals to cultivate it, and we do everything. But now we're starting to come away from that, right? Now, you know, the traditional family is in question. LGBT stuff is a lot more tolerated, you know, and accepted, which is good. People aren't shamed for being gay the way they used to be. You know, women are a lot more empowered. You have women that are working full time, you know, and you know, all of this has changed. So the family structure is kind of being renegotiated, right? And so instead of having institutions kind of set up to deal with this way of doing things, we've kind of undone that, but there's still, the feelings are still there, right? I mean, you know, there's going to be a rivalry between the father and his son. That's going to happen, right? You're still going to have the young man feel that he's emasculated. On top of that, now there's a lot less economic opportunity. So while the society is not encouraging the kind of degrading that young men used to experience, right? I mean, we can think of many things. I don't want to get into details about this. You know, I don't want to trigger anyone too bad, but you know, there's a lot of rituals and things that went on to young men that were specifically designed to foment this kind of rage. Well, we're backing away from that. All right. And that's good. Right. And we're not, you know, the kind of the bullying culture and all that is being watered down. And that's good. However, we still have this expectation, right? And there's still a lot of problems with how we deal with men. You know, I've said many times on here, and I mean, I will say again that one of the most common things I hear, right, is that you hear women that are really into feminism. They are all about feminism, right? They are all about feminism. They're like, yes, women's rights. I want women to get paid exactly the same as a man, and I want women to have exactly the same opportunities as men. Great. All great. However, those women, I can guarantee you, they would never date a guy who doesn't have a good paying job. A lot of feminist women, not all of them, exceptions, of course, but a lot of these women that are all about, oh, you know, I'm going to be empowered. I don't need a man. You know, that if a guy doesn't have a good paying job, they won't date him. Why? Why? Right? I mean, why? You know, and if a guy doesn't have a good paying job, if a guy's dependent on them financially, they're going to tell all their friends are going to be like, leave that loser, you know, stop wasting your time with that. Why? Right? If you were equal, right? I mean, no one says anything. If the guy is working the whole time and the woman doesn't have a job, no one says anything, right? And they would all be fine with that. But if the man is not working and he's dependent on the woman, oh my God, it immediately becomes what a worthless, you know what I mean? So it's like the expectations haven't changed, right? The expectations haven't changed, but the opportunities have changed. Well, if the opportunities have changed, women can go out and get jobs that pay just as much as men and all of that, which they can't, right? Women don't get paid the same as men, right? Yeah, I mean, people know what I'm saying here, right? And that this creates a situation where, where there's, when you have a lot of unemployed young men, they're going to feel like utter shit, and if you have young men that don't have economic opportunities, they're going to feel like utter shit. And if they're still living at home with a father who is constantly battling with them to prove that he's the real man, and you can see how in a lot of young men this creates a disaster. So we're dealing with we're dealing with a rupture in the old relations. Basically, there's a rupture in the old relations, and what it means to become a young man. The incel shit, right? That we're talking about, this incel stuff, the angry young white men, and the alt-right and all of this. A lot of this is rooted in the fact that we are renegotiating traditional social relations, which is good, but we're not, they don't just change. You don't just push a button and these things change. They have to adjust. So I don't know. I've probably said a lot of things on that in that rant there that are cancelable. So I apologize for that. But it needs to be said, right? That society, gender relations, and society, family relations and dynamics are changing, and as a result of that, it's causing a lot of mental illness among young men. And one way that young men that feel that they have been robbed of their dignity try to assert their power and their strength is with mass murder, right? In a lot of cases, young men who feel that they have been, that feel that they need to prove to the world that they're real men, that feel they need to prove to the world that that they have value, that they're tough, they become mass murderers, and that's horrendous and it's awful. And I don't feel sorry for them. I'm not saying that, that makes it okay what they did. Please. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying that I think the weird form of mental illness that causes people to become mass murderers is related to the fact that the identity and the way society deals with young men is changing. And thank you, Kelly, for the super chat. So there you go. There we go. Well, thank you, Omar. Very good. I'm glad you liked it. I very much appreciate that. All right. New inventions under socialism. LED lights were invented under socialism. AK-47 rifles were invented under socialism. The first cell phone, cellular phone, mobile phone in history was invented by Kaprianovich in the Soviet Union. A lot of people say fast food comes from the Soviet Union, comes from the collective kitchens that the USSR had during the 5-year plans. I've never seen full proof of that, but I've heard many people say that fast food in the USA with Route 66 and the Depression, you got the beginning of fast food, but it was actually in the Soviet Union, the collective kitchens kind of laid the basis for fast food. I think that's interesting. What else? Kindergarten, right? Supposedly, or no, daycare, right? Kindergarten was in Germany, but daycare, like daycare centers so women could work, right? That was the Bolsheviks invented that. The daycare was something that they invented as part of their, industrial reforms to try and get women to work in factories. Space travel, that's a good one. Class analysis, space travel, very good, Ryan. Yeah. So Caleb is the leader the chaotic world needs. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'm doing the best I can, just like all of us, right? We're all just doing the best we can, right? These are crazy times and we're all doing the best we can. I heard this story about Gus Hall, the late leader of the Communist Party back when it was a little bit better, when it was the Soviet aligned party. The story goes that Gus Hall got out of prison and he was running for president. Gus Hall went to federal prison for being a communist, right? Because they said he was teaching the violent overthrow of the US government, which he was not doing. But they said by selling the writings of Marx and Lenin, like he was teaching an ideology that could inspire the violent overthrow of the government. So he spent like 8 years in prison. And he tried to flee to Mexico, I guess. And so because they abducted him from Mexico, he got an additional sentence for trying to flee. So Gus Hall did some serious time in federal prison. So when Gus Hall got out of prison, he ran for president again. When he got out of prison, he ran for president. I'm trying to remember what year that would have been, right? I think in 1968 they ran Charlene Mitchell. They didn't run Gus Hall. but I think it may have been earlier, maybe in the early 60s, or maybe it was later. But anyway, Gus Hall was the Communist Party boss in the United States. Post McCarthyism, post World War II, Gus Hall was the Communist Party boss until he died in the year 2000. And he got out of prison, and he was touring the country on one of his presidential campaigns. And he was touring, and he was giving a speech somewhere, and his speech is over, and people are coming up to him and talking. The story that I heard is that somebody ran up to Gus Hall, and they ran up to Gus Hall, and they were crying. They just had tears in their eyes, and they said, Gus, I'm so ashamed. He said, when the McCarthyism started and the witch hunts started, I burned my party card. I buried all my communist books in the backyard. I was so scared. I had a wife and kids, and I didn't want to go to jail, and I didn't want the FBI to make me lose my job. And so I'm so ashamed, Gus, because I see you're out of prison now, and you're just as bold as you ever were. And I'm so ashamed. I burned my party card. I buried my communist books in the backyard. I talked against communism at work, so that no one would think I was one. And oh my God, I just feel awful about it. I just feel horrible. And Gus Hall turned to the comrade and he hugged him. He just gave him a big hug. And he said, Comrade, he said, you did what you could do. And I did what I could do. We all did what we could do in those tough times. And it's okay. And that we all can contribute in different ways. Not everyone can contribute in the same way. People have different capabilities. Gus Hall made the decision that he was going to go to prison, that he was going to try to flee to Mexico, that he was going to, call out the McCarthy, be a smart ass before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Gus Hall did a very heroic, he said that was what he could do. But this guy couldn't do that for whatever reason. And that it wasn't about someone being better than somebody else. It wasn't about feeling ashamed. And he said, no, comrade, you did what you could do. I did what I could do. And that's the attitude that we ought to have, right? I think my goal is to maximize the potential of every revolutionary person, especially revolutionary young people that are full of enthusiasm, that have discovered this kind of politics on their own. I want to maximize your revolutionary potential. But I realize everyone has their limitations. Everybody has their limitations. Everyone has their limitations. Everyone has their limitations. And you just have to realize that when you meet people, I feel like this is one of the ways I've gotten better in dealing with people. So when I meet people and they let me down, when I meet people, I don't have huge expectations of them first. And when I meet people and they let me down, I make a note of it. I don't get mad at them. I go, aha, this is your limitation. Right? And that's what I should do, because everyone has their limitations. There are things that I can't do. There are ways that I'm awesome, but there are ways that I will let you down. But if I'm letting you down, it's because that's one of my limitations. And I can improve on my limitations for sure. And so can all of us. But everyone has their limitations, right? And that when you meet people, you shouldn't expect everyone to make your dreams come true. You should meet people and realize that they're going to have their limitations, but also realize that they are going to have their capabilities. And that as a revolutionary organizer, when you meet people, you should be assessing their capabilities. What are they capable of? Right? What are they capable of? And, when you see someone let you down, you say, aha, that's their limitation. But when you see someone do something, you should go, very good. And one of the signs that I've noticed, there's a certain type of person who meets you. You meet them, or they meet you, or they meet someone new, and they immediately blow the person up. They have huge expectations. Oh, this person could do this, and this person could do that, and they could do that. And then pretty soon, after knowing the person for a couple months or maybe a year, they start to realize that person ain't infallible. That person has limitations. And pretty soon, they don't like that person anymore. That's not the kind of way, that's not a good way to be. You need to accept people for their flaws. You need to recognize that people will let you down, but you also need to recognize the areas in which they're helpful. And that's my way of dealing with people, right? I try to not blow people up into infallible characters who could do no wrong. I try not to, believe that people are going to make all my dreams come true, but I also try to forgive people for their limitations. That's kind of my approach in dealing with people. But anyway, folks, I think that's our stream for tonight. So there we go. There we go. We're just loading the mantra. In the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. All righty. Have a good night, folks.